Tell me, which part of the world are you watching from?
What clue caught your attention first?
Let's discuss the today's story. Here is the chapter 1.
Chapter 1. The Ring in the Silent Office. At 9:09 on a wet Thursday evening, Nero Wolfe was discussing mushrooms with the gravity other men reserve for war. Marriage and taxes. I was at my desk in the office, finishing a letter to a man in Albany who had tried to pay us with gratitude. Wolfe was behind his desk, leaning back in the chair that had been built to accept him. Rain tapped the windows. Somewhere in the rear of the brownstone, Fritz Brenner was preparing veal, and above us 10,000 orchids slept under glass. "The common mushroom," Wolfe said, "is not contemptible, Archie. It is merely abused. Put that in the letter to Albany. Maybe he'll send a check out of shame." The telephone rang. That became important because of another call we had received at 5. A businessman named Arthur Hensley had requested an appointment for 10 that night. He had refused to state his business, saying only that by 10 he might be able to prove a murder was going to happen. Wolfe had objected to the hour, but curiosity had defeated comfort by a narrow vote. I lifted the receiver. "Nero Wolfe's office. Archie Goodwin speaking." A man said, "This is Arthur Bell. I'm calling from Hensley and Mercer on Riddle Street. Mr. Hensley won't keep his appointment." "Why not?" "He's dead." I looked at Wolfe. "Natural causes?" "Not unless nature has started using a .32 caliber pistol." Wolfe's head came forward half an inch. Bell identified himself as a private investigator hired by Hensley 3 weeks earlier. He had found Wolfe's card on the dead man's desk, with 10 o'clock written across it. The police were already present, and Inspector Kramer was on his way. I covered the mouthpiece. "Bell suggests I go down. He would. Do I?" Wolfe shut his eyes, denying the world the pleasure of watching him react. "Observe. Do not interfere with the police. Return in time for dinner." Fritz appeared in the doorway. "Dinner will be ready at 10. Then, Wolfe said, "Human folly must be brief. Riddle Street is one of those downtown streets that appears to have been misplaced during the building of Manhattan. Number 18 was an old brick structure, with narrow windows, brass nameplates, and an elevator smelling of oil and damp rope. Hensley and Mercer occupied the 4th floor. The outer office was long and bright, but as silent as a railway platform after the last train. A young woman in a dark green dress sat by the wall gripping a handkerchief. A heavy man with a red face stood near the windows. Policemen moved in and out of an inner room. Arthur Bell met me at the reception counter. He was about 50, lean and grey-haired, with pale eyes and a straight mouth. His brown suit had not been chosen to entertain anyone. "Goodwin? Bell?" He nodded and led me inside. Arthur Hensley sat behind a large walnut desk. He had fallen sideways in his chair, his right shoulder against the carved arm. A pistol lay on the carpet below his hand. There was a small wound at his right temple, and blood in his silver hair on the left. His eyes were open. A police photographer worked near the window. A doctor spoke to a sergeant. I stopped at the edge of the carpet. Who found him? Miriam Lane, his secretary. The woman outside. She returned at 8:40, because Hensley had asked her to bring a contract she had taken home for typing. She found him at 8:42 and called me before the police. "Why you first?" Hensley ordered her to contact me if anything unusual happened. A dead employer qualified. Bell almost smiled. I arrived at 8:51. Patrolman came 2 minutes later. On the desk lay Wolfe's card. Across it, someone had written in blue pencil, 10 p.m., tell him everything. Beside it stood a half-full glass of water and an ashtray holding 1 cigar stub and 2 cigarette ends. Hensley's left hand rested against his vest. His right hung loose. "Suicide?" I asked. The police considered it for 4 minutes. Hensley was left-handed. The pistol is on his right. The doctor also says the muzzle was at least 18 inches away. The red-faced man entered. He was in his early 50s, with black hair and a dark suit stretched across his stomach. "Who is this?" Bell said, "Archie Goodwin." "Nero Wolfe's assistant." The man's eyes changed. "Why is Wolfe involved?" "Mr. Hensley made an appointment with him for 10, I said. "You are?" "Daniel Mercer, Arthur's partner. Where were you at 8? "Sat at the Carlton Club. 20 men saw me." Bell said, "That should be enough unless they were all looking the other way." Mercer's face tightened. "You were hired to protect him." I was hired to learn who had been taking papers from his desk. That interested me. Bell explained that company records had been removed, copied, and returned. Hensley believed someone inside the firm was responsible. Mercer said, "That has nothing to do with this." "What does?" I asked. "I don't know." The telephone rang. It was an old black instrument on the right side of the desk. In that silent room, its bell sounded like a hammer on metal. Everyone moved a little. Daniel Mercer crossed the room in 2 quick strides and seized the receiver before the second ring finished. "Yes?" he said, his face tightened. "No, he cannot come to the telephone." A pause. "Who is calling?" Another pause. "Hello, hello?" He lowered the receiver. The sergeant asked, "What was that?" "A wrong number." "What did they say?" "They asked for Arthur." That is not usually a wrong number in Arthur's office. The caller disconnected. Bell watched him. "Why did you answer it?" Mercer turned sharply. "Why shouldn't I?" "You were 6 feet away." The sergeant stood beside the desk. Goodwin was nearer. "You moved before the first ring was complete." "It startled me." "It startled all of us," I said. "You recovered fastest." "Is speed a crime?" "No, but it can be a biography." Before he could answer, Inspector Kramer entered with Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins behind him. Rain shone on Kramer's coat, and his square face wore the expression he usually saved for Wolf and broken elevators. He saw me. "Goodwin, what are you doing here?" "Enjoying the nightlife." Bell explained about the card and Hensley's appointment. Kramer turned to me. "What did Hensley tell Wolf?" "That he might be able to prove a murder was going to happen." "His?" "He didn't specify." "And Wolf let him wait until 10? "He insisted." Kramer grunted. "A man predicts murder and schedules it around Wolf's dinner. That is unfair." "He scheduled it around his own death." Pearlie coughed. Kramer ignored him and questioned Mercer about the telephone call. Mercer repeated the wrong number story. Bell described his rush to answer. I supplied the exact words. Kramer then cleared the room except for the doctor, Bell, Pearlie, and me. Mercer objected. Kramer told him to object outside. Bell pointed to the ashtray. "Hensley smoked cigars, not cigarettes." "2 brands," I said. "1 plain, 1 gold-tipped." "Mercer smokes the plain kind," Bell said. "Evelyn Hensley uses the gold-tipped ones." "Wife?" Kramer asked. "Widow now." Kramer looked at Bell. "Tell me why Hensley hired you." Bell said Hensley and Mercer owned a shipping insurance firm they had built over 24 years. They had recently quarreled over a proposed sale. Hensley opposed it. Mercer favored it. Hensley also believed confidential papers were being copied. Bell had narrowed access to 4 people: Mercer, Miriam Lane, Evelyn Hensley, and a junior partner named Stephen Vale. Some of the missing records concerned Caleb Ross, a former employee who had served 6 years in prison for falsifying claims after Hensley testified against him. Ross had been released the previous month. "That gives us a 5th, Kramer said. "It gives you a loud motive," Bell replied. "Loud motives are not always good ones." The doctor estimated death between 7:45 and 8:15. The bullet had entered the right temple and traveled slightly downward. No struggle. Death immediate. As the photographer shifted his light, I noticed a narrow strip of white paper under the telephone cord. "Hold it." Kramer's head snapped around. "Don't touch anything." I wasn't planning to. Pearlie put on gloves, lifted the cord, and drew out part of a torn envelope. 3 typewritten words appeared on it. "Call at 9:10. We looked at the mantel clock. It said 9:23. The telephone had rung at 9:10. Bell's eyes moved toward the closed door. Mercer expected it. Kramer called him back. Mercer entered with caution already forming around him. Kramer showed him the paper. "What is this?" "I have no idea." "The phone rang at 9:10. I can tell time. Who was supposed to call?" "I don't know." "Why did you rush to answer?" "Reflex." Your reflex knew the schedule. For 1 second, fear showed plainly on Mercer's face. Then it disappeared. Arthur received dozens of calls. That note could refer to anyone. Then why was it hidden under the cord? "I don't know," a woman cried out in the outer office. We went through the door. A tall woman in a black raincoat stood at the entrance, one hand at her throat. She was handsome rather than pretty, with dark hair pulled back and a face trained to conceal pain. "Where is Arthur?" No one answered quickly enough. Her eyes found Mercer. "Daniel?" He approached her. "Evelyn, I'm sorry." She looked past him toward the inner office. "No." Bell asked her to sit. She turned on him. He hired you because he was frightened. You said you would find who was threatening him. I said I would try. You failed. Yes, the answer stopped her. She sat. Kramer questioned her. She had been home since 6. Her housekeeper had stayed until 8, after which she was alone. Hensley had telephoned her at 7:20 and told her not to come to the office. Did he mention Wolf? Kramer asked. She looked at me. He said he had finally decided to consult someone who could see through a locked door. That sounds like publicity copy, I said, but I'll take it. What frightened him? Kramer asked. He believed someone was arranging events around him. Papers vanished and returned. Appointments appeared in his calendar that he had not made. Twice he received telephone calls in which no one spoke. Bell frowned. You never told me that. I promised Arthur I would say nothing. He thought the calls were warnings. Warnings of what? I don't know. Daniel Mercer stood near the reception desk, too still. I asked Mrs. Hensley whether she smoked gold-tipped cigarettes. She said yes, but denied being in the office that evening. She had last visited the previous afternoon and had smoked 1 or 2 cigarettes in her husband's room. A young man arrived, hatless and breathless. Stephen Vale was about 30, narrow-shouldered, with light brown hair and the anxious look of a man who always reached doors 1 second after they closed. He admitted opposing the sale, as Hensley had, but denied taking papers. He claimed he had been dining alone, then walking north. While Kramer questioned him, Bell and I returned to the inner office. The body had been covered. Rain traced the windows. Hensley called me at 6:15, Bell said. He told me he had discovered how the papers were being removed. He would not name the person. He asked me to come at 9. He set Wolf for 10 and you for 9. Yes. Maybe he planned to give you the facts and Wolf the conclusion. Bell looked at Wolf's card. Or he expected one of us to survive him. I studied the desk. The water showed a faint, cloudy line near the bottom. The cigar had been crushed hard. The blotter bore a deep groove where someone had written on a missing sheet. Was there paper here when you arrived? No. Somebody took it. Kramer came in. Goodwin, I want Wolf here tomorrow morning. You can want him in China. He won't go there either. This man called him about a murder. This man is dead, I noticed. I'll report. Wolf will decide whether the case justifies movement. Kramer's face darkened. A man has been murdered. That alone has never moved him. New York has too many murdered men and too few good cooks. Bell said, tell Wolf about the 910 note. And tell him Hensley had another appointment after Wolf. That is new. Bell took out a notebook. Hensley's desk calendar has an entry at 11:15. 2 initials DM. We looked toward the outer office where Mercer was answering questions. Mercer, I asked. He denies it. At 9:52 I left number 18 Riddle Street. Kramer had ordered everyone held. As I reached the elevator, the office telephone rang again. This time no one moved quickly. Kramer answered it. He listened, then looked straight at Mercer. It's for you. Mercer did not take the receiver. I stayed long enough to hear Kramer ask the caller's name. The line went dead. Back at West 35th Street, Fritz had kept dinner warm by methods known only to him. Wolf had delayed 10 minutes and regarded that as an act of devotion. I gave him the report while he ate veal with mushrooms and small potatoes. He did not interrupt until I repeated Mercer's words during the first call. No, he cannot come to the telephone, Wolf said. He did not first ask who wished to speak to Hensley. No, he answered as if the caller's purpose were known. Bell thought so. Mr. Bell may think when invited. I continued through the note, the cigarettes, the missing sheet, the 11:15 appointment, and the second call. Wolf finished eating and leaned back. Pfui, that covers several points. Which one? All. Hensley feared death. He made separate appointments with a private investigator and with me. He left an instruction for a call at 9:10. He was dead before the telephone rang. His partner answered with indecent haste. Either the murderer is a fool, or someone wishes us to believe he is. Us? Hensley summoned me. Death does not cancel a contract before its terms are known. He never mentioned a fee. That is a defect. Kramer wants you downtown. That is another. At the office door, Wolf stopped. Archie, the note said call at 9:10. Did it say whom to call? No? Then the ringing telephone may not have fulfilled the instruction. I looked at him. A telephone can ring because someone calls in, he said. It can also ring because someone has arranged for it to do so. Those are not the same event. You think it was a signal? I think nothing. I merely refused to let a bell tell me why it rang. He went upstairs to the orchids. I returned to my desk. Rain still touched the windows. On Riddle Street, Arthur Hensley's office would be sealed and the telephone silent, but I had heard it twice. And Daniel Mercer had heard it before the first sound was finished. That was the beginning. Chapter 2. The Caller Who Hung Up at 8:20 the next morning. While Wolf was upstairs among the orchids, the telephone rang. After dreaming about black instruments ringing in empty rooms, I let it go twice before answering. Archie Goodwin, this is Bell. Mercer is still talking. Arthur Bell had remained at the Riddle Street office until after 2. The police had sealed Hensley's room and taken the pistol, water glass, ashtray, and torn note. Daniel Mercer had been questioned for nearly 3 hours. He still insisted that he answered the 910 call merely from habit. Habit, I said. Did he spend his childhood racing bells? He says Arthur disliked interruptions, so Mercer always answered after-hours calls. Arthur was dead. That should have reduced the interruption. Bell wanted me at Hensley and Mercer by 10. At 9 I reported to Wolf, who was behind his desk with beer. Mr. Mercer claims habit, I said. Habit may explain repetition, Wolf said. It does not explain anticipation. So I go? Determine who knew Hensley would be in his office at 9:10. Do not ask, only who admits knowing. At 10 minutes before 10 I entered the Riddle Street office. Miriam Lane sat behind the reception counter, sorting unopened mail. Bell had a yellow pad on his knee with 6 names: Daniel Mercer, Miriam Lane, Evelyn Hensley, Stephen Vale, Caleb Ross, Arthur Bell. You forgot Wolf, I said. He knew Hensley intended to be here at 10. Not 9:10. Miriam looked up. Her eyes were red. Mr. Bell has asked me the same question 4 ways. He is saving the 5th for me. Who knew Mr. Hensley would be working late? I did. Mr. Mercer did. Mr. Vale probably did. Mrs. Hensley may have known. Mr. Bell knew because Mr. Hensley arranged to meet him. Did Hensley usually work late? Not recently. His doctor told him to leave by 6. How often did the telephone ring after 8? Almost never. Who would expect anyone to answer? She glanced toward Hensley's closed door. Very few. After 6, calls were transferred to an answering service. Then why did last night's call come through? Mr. Hensley suspended the service yesterday afternoon. Bell stopped writing. Why? He said he expected a private call and did not want it recorded. Someone had not merely guessed Hensley might be present. Someone knew the line would remain open. Who heard him give the order? Bell asked. I did. Mr. Mercer was in the adjoining office with the door open. Mr. Vale came in a few minutes later. Mrs. Hensley telephoned at 5, and I told her Arthur would be working late. Bell marked 4 names. Miriam glanced at the list. Caleb Ross should not be there. Why not? I asked. He had no way of knowing. You know Ross. She hesitated. He came here 2 weeks ago. Bell stared at her. Hensley told me Ross had made no contact. He did not speak to Mr. Hensley. He left an envelope. What was in it? I don't know. It was sealed. I put it on Mr. Hensley's desk, and later it was gone. Why conceal this? I did not. Mr. Hensley said it had nothing to do with the missing papers. She was afraid. But fear has many departments. Stephen Vale arrived at 10:15 and admitted Hensley had told him he intended to remain until 11. Vale had learned it during an argument about the proposed sale. He denied knowing about the 910 call. Daniel Mercer entered with his lawyer Howard Pike, a thin man whose expression suggested he billed by the objection. My client will answer no more questions without me, Pike said. Your client answered the telephone without you, I said. Mercer glared. I explained that. It was habit. Miss Lane says after-hours calls went to a service. I meant an old habit. Bell leaned forward. Who was supposed to call at 9:10? No one I knew. Then why did you say no, he cannot come to the telephone before asking who was calling? I assumed the caller wanted Arthur. It was a company office, that Bell said. There were 6 desks and 2 partners. Mercer stepped toward him. Are you accusing me? Not yet. The telephone rang. Every head turned. Nobody moved. It rang again. Bell watched Mercer. Mercer watched the instrument as if it had developed teeth. On the 3rd ring I picked it up. Goodwin speaking. There was no voice. I heard only the faint current and something that might have been breathing. Mr. Hensley is still unavailable, I said. Mr. Mercer is here. The caller disconnected. Mercer had gone pale. Bell checked the clock. 10:23. He called the exchange. The call had been too brief to trace and had come through a public telephone. Miriam whispered, "It happened again." Mercer turned on her. "What do you mean?" "The silent calls. Mr. Hensley received 2 last week." "What did Hensley do afterward?" I asked. "The first time he locked his desk. The second time he asked whether Mr. Mercer had returned from lunch. Mercer said, 'That is absurd.' Inspector Kramer entered with Pearlie Stebbins and a folder. The lab found a mild sedative in Hensley's water," Kramer said. "Not enough to kill him, but enough to slow him. The pistol belonged to Hensley, but it had no usable prints." Pearlie handed him a page. Kramer read it and looked at Mercer. "The 9:10 call last night came from a booth in the lobby of the Carlton Club." Mercer said nothing. "That is where you claim you were dining," Kramer continued. Pike cut in. "Many people use that lobby. Not many knew Hensley would be beside this telephone at 9:10. Bell studied Mercer. "You rushed to answer because you expected a message." "No, or a signal," Mercer's voice rose. "Arthur told me that if the telephone rang at 9:10, I was to answer it. He said the caller would give me a name." Pike seized his arm. "Daniel, stop!" Kramer said. "What name?" "He did not say." "Why hide this last night?" "Because Arthur was dead, the note was under the cord, and everyone was staring at me." "What did the caller say?" Mercer waited too long. "Nothing," I remembered his exact words. "No, he cannot come to the telephone. That was not what a man said to silence." I called Wolf from Miriam's desk and reported the answering service. Ross's envelope, the new silent call, the trace to the Carlton Club, and Mercer's admission. Wolf was quiet. "Mr. Mercer is lying twice," he said. "Only twice. He lied when he said the caller spoke no name. He also lied when he said Hensley instructed him to answer. How do you know? If Hensley wished Mercer to receive a name, he would not have hidden the written reminder beneath the telephone cord. The reminder was concealed from Mercer, not left for him. So the note was for Hensley. Obviously. And Mercer learned about the call from someone else. Yes. Who? That, Archie, is why Mr. Bell is making a list." Wolf hung up. I returned to Bell and took the pencil from his hand. Beneath the 6 names, I added a 7th unknown caller. Bell read it and drew a line underneath. By noon, we knew who might have expected the telephone to ring. We did not know who made it ring, what name had been promised, or why Daniel Mercer had lied before the dead man was cold. But the caller who hung up had proved one thing: someone was still following Arthur Hensley's schedule. Chapter 3. The missing appointment by 1 o'clock. Arthur Hensley's office had acquired the stale, defeated smell that follows a police search. Drawers stood open, papers leaned in uncertain piles, and fingerprint powder marked the polished surfaces. The room no longer looked like a place where a man had conducted business. It looked like a place where strangers had tried to reconstruct his last hour and had failed. Inspector Kramer had permitted Arthur Bell to examine the papers because Hensley had employed him before the murder. He permitted me to remain because removing me would have required energy better spent on Daniel Mercer. Mercer and his lawyer had been taken downtown. Miriam Lane sat in the outer office, answering questions from Pearlie Stebbins. Stephen Vale had been sent home with instructions not to leave the city. Evelyn Hensley had returned to her house after identifying her husband's body. Bell stood at Hensley's desk, examining each item before placing it aside. "You always search this slowly?" I asked. "I search at the speed people hide things." "That sounds expensive." Hensley paid in advance. He opened the shallow center drawer and removed 3 pencils, a ruler, a box of clips, and a small black appointment book. The book had already been handled by the police, but apparently not with affection. Bell turned the pages one by one. Most were crowded with Hensley's compact handwriting. Meetings, lunches, telephone calls, and reminders filled the lines. The entries for Thursday began with a bank conference at 10, lunch with Stephen Vale at 1, and a medical appointment at 4:30. At 6:15 he had written Bell, at 10 he had written Wolf. At 11:15 appeared the initials DM, the same entry Bell had seen on the desk calendar. Between Bell and Wolf there should have been room for 2 more appointments. There was not. A narrow portion of the page had been torn away. Bell bent closer. This was not an accident. The missing strip began below the 6:15 entry and ended above the 10 o'clock appointment. Whoever removed it had torn carefully along the inner binding, taking one complete line and part of another. The edges were rough but deliberate. What time was on the missing line? I asked. Bell compared the page with the previous Thursday. Hensley divided his evenings into 15-minute intervals, 8 o'clock or 8:15. That puts the visitor close to the doctor's estimate of death. Kramer came over. "What have you got?" Bell handed him the book. Kramer examined the torn edge and frowned. "This was in the drawer when we searched last night." "You missed the missing part," I said. "I usually miss things that aren't there. That explains several cases." He gave me a look and called Pearlie. The appointment book was placed in an evidence envelope, but not before Bell copied every entry onto his pad. Kramer said, "The killer could have removed his own name, or someone removed another person's name to make us think that," Bell replied. "Either way, somebody was here by appointment. Miriam Lane was brought in. She stood inside the doorway without looking toward the chair where Hensley had died. Kramer showed her the book. Did Mr. Hensley have a meeting around 8? Miriam pressed her lips together. Bell said, "You told us he expected a private call. You did not mention a visitor. I was not certain the meeting was still arranged." "With whom?" "I don't know." Kramer's voice hardened. "Miss Lane, your employer was shot in this room. This is no time to protect his calendar. I am not protecting anyone. You have been doing it since last night." She looked toward Bell. Mr. Hensley had been negotiating a financial settlement for several months. He said the matter had become dangerous. "What kind of settlement?" I asked. He never explained fully. "It concerned money the company had refused to pay years ago. An insurance claim." I assumed so. Bell asked Caleb Ross. Had the name Miriam's hands tightened around her handkerchief? "I don't know. That answer is getting worn," Kramer said. She took a breath. "Yesterday afternoon, Mr. Hensley told me someone might come at 8. He said I was to leave before 7 and not return unless he telephoned. Later, he asked me to bring the Vale contract back at 8:40. I thought the earlier meeting had been cancelled. Did he give you the visitor's name?" "No, he called the person the claimant." Kramer asked what was being claimed. $300,000. That improved the room's attention. Bell said, "Hensley told me the missing records involved fraudulent shipping claims. Was this one of them?" "I believe so. For months he had been reviewing an old file called North Atlantic Export." Bell's pencil stopped. "What is it?" I asked. "Hensley and Mercer handled insurance for North Atlantic Export 15 years ago. A warehouse fire destroyed a shipment valued at $300,000. The firm refused payment after Caleb Ross produced evidence that the inventory records had been altered. And Ross went to prison," Kramer said. "For falsifying the evidence," Bell replied. "Hensley testified against him." Miriam shook her head. Mr. Hensley had begun to doubt that testimony. Kramer moved closer. "Why?" "He found an original ledger that did not match the copy used at the trial. He believed Mr. Ross might have been telling the truth. The office grew quiet enough for us to hear a typewriter in another suite. If Hensley's testimony had helped send an innocent man to prison, $300,000 was only the beginning. There would be damages, criminal exposure, and enough public disgrace to sink Hensley and Mercer before lunch. Who knew about the ledger? Bell asked. "Mr. Hensley, Mr. Mercer, possibly Mr. Vale? And you," I said. "Yes, Mrs. Hensley?" "I don't know." Kramer asked where the ledger was. Miriam looked at the open drawers. "It should have been in the safe." The safe stood behind a framed shipping map. Pearlie opened it with a combination found in Hensley's private notes. Inside were cash, bonds, contracts, and several company ledgers. The North Atlantic Export file was not among them. Bell searched the index twice. "The ledger is gone," he said. Kramer turned to Miriam. "When did you last see it?" "Yesterday morning. Mr. Hensley removed it from the safe and placed it in a brown portfolio." "What did he do with the portfolio?" "He kept it beside his desk. No brown portfolio had been found. That gave us a missing visitor, a missing appointment, a missing ledger, and a missing portfolio. Hensley had been generous with absences. Kramer sent officers to search the other rooms. Bell examined the torn appointment page under a desk lamp. The pressure of Hensley's pencil had marked the sheet below, but only faintly. "Get me a soft pencil," he said. Kramer objected before Bell touched the evidence. A police technician arrived with angled light and photographic equipment. After several minutes, Shallow impressions appeared on the following page. The time was 8:15. Beneath, it were fragments of letters. The first word seemed to begin with R. The second contained two tall strokes and ended with what might have been an N. Ross. Pearlie suggested, "Too short for the second word," Bell said. "Caleb Ross would fit across both, but Hensley usually wrote surnames first," Miriam said. Kramer studied the indentation. "It could say Ross Settlement," Bell shook his head. "Or review claim. Or bring ledger. We are reading what we expect." That was the first sensible thing anyone had said in several minutes. I telephoned Wolf. He had finished lunch and was annoyed by the existence of afternoon. I reported the torn appointment page, the 8:15 meeting, the North Atlantic export claim, Hensley's doubts about his testimony and the missing ledger. "Indeed," Wolf said. "Is that approval?" "No, it is acknowledgement. The police think Caleb Ross may have come for a settlement. The police have a name and therefore feel nourished. Bell is less certain. Mr. Bell's uncertainty is his best quality." I described the pressure marks. Wolf asked, "Was the appointment removed before or after Hensley's death?" "That question is why people pay you. They rarely pay enough. If Hensley removed it himself, he wished to conceal the visitor even from anyone reading his calendar later. If the visitor removed it, the name was dangerous. If a third person removed it, the meeting itself was dangerous. That narrows it to everybody, and not everybody. Only those who knew the appointment book existed and where Hensley kept it. I looked through the glass partition at Miriam Lane. His secretary knew. Of course. Mercer? Probably. Vale? Possibly. Evelyn. Ask her. And Caleb Ross? That depends on whether he was the appointment. Wolf paused. Archie, the torn page is theatrical. You think it was meant to be found. I think a careful murderer who wished to conceal an appointment would remove the entire book. Tearing one line calls attention to the absence, so the missing name may not be the killer's. Precisely. Someone wants Mr. Bell to search for the visitor, while ignoring the person already inside the office. The line went quiet. Who was already inside? I asked. You have given me insufficient facts. That has never stopped you before. It frequently stops me. You merely fail to notice. He hung up. When I returned to the inner office, Bell was questioning Miriam about the Brown portfolio. She said Hensley had carried it into Mercer's office at 5:30 and returned without it. Mercer had later claimed never to have seen it. Bell added that to his list. At 3:20, Pearlie found a small scrap of black paper caught behind the lower desk drawer. It matched the cover of the appointment book, but not the torn white page. The book's back pocket had been cut open. Inside that pocket, Hensley had kept appointment cards, private addresses and telephone numbers. Whatever had been hidden there was gone. Miriam stared at the cut seam. He kept a photograph in that pocket. A photograph of whom? Kramer asked. I never saw it clearly. It showed two men standing in front of a burned warehouse. Mr. Hensley looked much younger. And the other man? She swallowed. Caleb Ross. Bell closed his notebook. The missing meeting was no longer merely a line in an appointment book. It was tied to a fire 15 years old, a vanished ledger, and a man Arthur Hensley may have helped send to prison. But as Wolf had pointed out, the torn page was too obvious. Someone had removed the name, then left the wound where everyone would see it. The question was not only who had been expected at 8:15, it was who wanted us to believe that visitor had killed Arthur Hensley. Chapter 4. The voice nobody heard. The next morning brought sunshine, which New York used badly. It exposed soot on the windows, cracks in the pavement, and the fact that most men look less impressive when clearly seen. At 11, Arthur Bell came to the brownstone carrying a folder under one arm and dissatisfaction under the other. I took him to the office, where Wolf sat behind his desk examining a catalogue of orchid hybrids. Bell accepted the red leather chair and placed the folder on his knees. The telephone company traced both calls, he said. Wolf did not look up. You have already told Mr. Goodwin that the first came from the Carlton Club. That was wrong. The club operator recorded the call because it passed through the lobby exchange, but it originated from an outside public booth connected to the same local circuit. The booth is 3 blocks east of Riddle Street. That got Wolf's eyes away from the orchids. Bell opened the folder. The second silent call, the one Goodwin answered yesterday morning, came from another booth on the same avenue. 4 blocks farther north. 2 booths, I said. Same neighborhood. Both near subway entrances, Bell replied. Both used by hundreds of people. The police questioned attendants, newsstand owners, cab drivers and shopkeepers. No one remembers the caller. Did anyone see a person using either booth? Wolf asked. Several. No description agrees. One witness saw a short woman in a blue coat. Another remembers a tall man with a grey hat. A third insists the booth was empty at 9:10. That last witness is ambitious, I said. Bell ignored me. The first call lasted 31 seconds. The second lasted 12. No words were recorded because neither booth had monitoring equipment. Wolf leaned back. Yet Mr. Mercer answered the first call as though he heard a message. Yes. Therefore either the caller spoke and Mr. Mercer lied, or the absence of speech was itself the message. Bell nodded. I favor the first. I favor facts. You always do? When available. Bell placed 3 typed sheets on Wolf's desk. They were copies of notes found among Arthur Hensley's private papers. Each contained a date and a brief account of an anonymous telephone call. The first had come 6 weeks earlier. A disguised voice had said, "Stop examining the dormant accounts." The second, 10 days later, had said, "The dead claims should remain dead." The third had come 4 nights before Hensley's murder. That warning had been longer. You testified once. Do not make yourself a liar now. Hensley had written beneath it. Male voice, perhaps artificial. Slow delivery. Knew about Ross file. Wolf read the pages twice. Who knew of these notes? Miss Lane found them in a locked drawer yesterday, Bell said. She claims she had never seen them. Mercer denies knowing about the calls. Mrs. Hensley knew Arthur had received threats, but not what was said. Vale says Hensley mentioned one warning during an argument. And Caleb Ross? Still missing. Kramer had sent detectives to Ross's last address, a lodging house near the river. Ross had left 2 days before the murder with 1 suitcase and had not said where he was going. His room contained old newspaper clippings about the North Atlantic export fire, court records from his trial, and a photograph matching the one removed from Hensley's appointment book. So we have a convenient fugitive, I said. Bell's mouth tightened. Too convenient. Wolf made a small circle with his finger on the desk. These warnings did not command Hensley to abandon payment of the old claim. They commanded him to stop examining accounts. Bell agreed. That distinction matters, Wolf continued. The North Atlantic dispute may be one branch of a larger corruption. Bell removed another document. That is what I discovered this morning. Hensley had been reviewing 7 closed accounts. All involved shipping losses between 12 and 16 years ago. In each case, the company denied payment because supporting records were judged false. Who investigated those claims? I asked. Caleb Ross handled 3. Daniel Mercer supervised 2. Stephen Vale's father handled the others before his death. Wolf's lips moved slightly. He had found a shape in the fog, but was not yet ready to share it, Bell continued. The amounts total nearly $1 million. Hensley recently ordered original ledgers from storage. 4 are missing. Stolen recently? Wolf asked. Possibly years ago. No one checked until now. Who controlled the storage records? Miriam Lane for the past 8 years. Before that, Mercer's private clerk. Name? George Talbot. He died 5 years ago. Wolf shut his eyes. The dead are being heavily employed. I asked Bell why Hensley had begun examining accounts that old. That is the question. Miss Lane says he received an envelope 2 months ago containing a photocopy of a warehouse ledger. The figures did not match the records used at Caleb Ross's trial. Anonymous? Yes. Where is the photocopy? Gone with the brown portfolio. Wolf opened his eyes. Then the anonymous sender and the anonymous caller may be opposing persons. One urged Hensley to investigate. The other warned him to stop. Bell stared at him. I assumed the same person was applying pressure in different ways. Why? Because both used secrecy? Secrecy is not a political party. I got up and went to the filing cabinet for a city map. We marked the 2 booths, the Riddle Street office, the Carlton Club, and the nearest subway entrances. The first booth stood near a pharmacy. The second was outside a hotel. A person leaving Hensley and Mercer could reach either in under 10 minutes. Bell tapped the first mark. The killer could have left the office after shooting Hensley, walked here and placed the 910 call. Then why call? I asked. To establish that Hensley was expected alive at 9:10, Wolf shook his head. No. A caller wishing to establish life would ask to speak with Hensley and create witnesses to his absence. Instead, according to Mr. Mercer, the caller said nothing. According to Mercer, Bell repeated. Precisely. His account is worthless. The doorbell rang. Fritz admitted Inspector Kramer, who entered the office without waiting to be welcomed. Pearlie followed, carrying a small evidence bag. Kramer saw Bell and scowled. You people save time by gathering in one place. We try to reduce public suffering, I said. Pearlie placed the evidence bag on Wolf's desk. Inside was a small metal device with a rubber mouthpiece. We found it in the waste bin beside the second telephone booth, Kramer said. A voice distorter. Cheap novelty item. You speak through it and sound lower and rougher. Bell leaned forward. Prince? Wiped. Then it may have been planted, Wolf said. Kramer's jaw shifted. Everything may have been planted if you sit far enough from it. The object was found the day after the call in a public bin. It proves only that someone wished it found. Kramer handed me a typed laboratory report. Fibers caught in the device were dark green wool. Miriam Lane wore a dark green dress the night of the murder, I said. Kramer nodded. And owns a green wool coat. Bell stood. She said she went straight home after leaving the office. She did, Kramer said. According to her landlady, she arrived at 7:12. But she left again around 8:30 and did not return until after 10. That was new. Miss Lane told us Hensley ordered her back at 8:40 with the Vale contract. I said, she never brought it, Kramer replied. The contract was found this morning in her apartment. Bell's expression hardened. Where is she now? Waiting downtown, Wolf asked. Did she use the subway? She claims she walked to Riddle Street, saw police outside, became frightened and went home without entering. That does not place her near either booth. No, Kramer admitted. But the fibers do. Wolf pushed the evidence bag away. Fibers from common wool found on an object in a public waste bin do not place anyone anywhere. Kramer glared at him. I've never met Miss Lane. Mr. Goodwin has. That makes it worse. I told Kramer about the 7 closed accounts and 4 missing ledgers. He already knew. The police had also found evidence that Hensley had transferred $50,000 into a private account 6 weeks earlier. Blackmail payment? Bell asked. Or preparation for a settlement, Kramer said. Or bait, Wolf murmured. Kramer turned. What? Hensley received evidence that an old claim had been falsified. He began examining related accounts. Someone warned him away. He moved money, hired Mr. Bell, and arranged to consult me. Those are not the acts of a man merely frightened. They are the acts of a man preparing a trap. For whom? Kramer asked. That is not yet clear. Then you know nothing. I know the warnings failed, Kramer snorted. He is dead. Exactly. The purpose of a warning is to alter conduct. Hensley continued his inquiry. Therefore the caller frightened him but did not stop him. Either the caller misjudged Hensley, or fear alone was never the true objective. Bell sat again. What other objective? To make the threats part of the record. Kramer stared at Wolf. Wolf folded his hands over his middle. Anonymous calls, a disguised voice, missing ledgers, and a former convict who cannot be found. It is a complete portrait of Caleb Ross, painted before the murder occurred. You think Ross was framed? I think someone has taken pains to make him visible while remaining unseen, Pearlie said. Ross had reason to hate Hensley. So did every person whose theft Hensley threatened to uncover, Wolf replied. Bell looked toward me. The caller wanted Hensley frightened enough to document the threats. And to hire you, I said. Wolf nodded. A frightened man creates witnesses. Hensley wrote notes, spoke to his wife, confided in Vale, hired Mr. Bell, and approached me. By the time he died, 6 people were prepared to testify that someone connected to the old accounts had threatened him. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Then the threats were preparation for murder, possibly, and the silent calls. Continuation. Whoever planned the performance did not stop when the principal actor died. Bell gathered his papers. We still need the voice. No, Wolf said. A disguised voice is meant to be remembered without being recognized. The words matter more than the sound. He picked up the 3rd warning. You testified once. Do not make yourself a liar now. Wolf tapped the page. This caller did not accuse Hensley of lying at the trial. He warned him not to become a liar now. That phrasing assumes Hensley's original testimony was true. Bell went still. If Caleb Ross made the call, Wolf continued, he would insist that Hensley had lied 15 years ago. The warning was spoken by someone who wished to preserve the old verdict. Kramer took the page from him. Mercer, he said. Perhaps, or Vale, or another person whose safety depends upon Caleb Ross remaining guilty. Bell headed for the door with Kramer and Pearlie. Before leaving, he turned back. No witness heard the real voice. No witness saw the caller. All we have are words spoken through a machine. Wolf reached for the orchid catalogue. Words are often sufficient, Mr. Bell. Voices belong to throats. Language belongs to minds. After they had gone, I sat at my desk and looked at the map. 2 public booths several blocks apart. A caller nobody saw. A voice nobody heard clearly. A warning designed not merely to frighten Arthur Hensley, but to guide everyone toward the same suspect. Someone had wanted Hensley to keep digging just long enough to expose the old accounts. Then someone had killed him before he could reveal what he found. Chapter 5. The Hidden Ledger. The hidden ledger was discovered because Arthur Bell disliked clean floors. At 9:30 on Saturday morning, Bell telephoned the brownstone and asked for me. Wolf was upstairs with the orchids, and I was at my desk deciding whether the Morning Mail deserved to survive. I'm at Riddle Street, Bell said. There is a clean strip behind Hensley's filing cabinet. That sounds serious. It is 6 inches wide. The rest of the carpet has not been cleaned since the mayor was young. You think the cabinet was moved? I think someone wanted us to believe it had not been. I told Fritz where I was going and reached the office 20 minutes later. Inspector Kramer was already there, which meant Bell had made the mistake of calling the police before calling me. The outer office was empty, except for Pearlie Stebbins and a uniformed officer. Miriam Lane was still being questioned downtown. Daniel Mercer had been released after his lawyer complained loudly enough. Stephen Vale had disappeared into the care of his own attorney. Evelyn Hensley remained at home, receiving no visitors except policemen and people who claimed friendship with the dead. Bell stood in Arthur Hensley's office beside a tall steel filing cabinet. It had been pulled 3 feet from the wall. Behind it, the carpet showed a pale rectangle surrounded by grey dust. Kramer pointed at the wall. Tell Goodwin what you saw, Bell crouched. The cabinet's rear legs had left deep marks in the carpet, but there was a second set of marks 4 inches to the left. Someone had moved it recently and returned it slightly out of position. Last night? I asked. No, the dust suggests several weeks. A section of wooden baseboard had been removed. Behind it was a shallow recess cut between 2 wall studs. Pearlie had already taken out a narrow black ledger, wrapped in waxed paper. Kramer held it with gloved hands. Not the original North Atlantic ledger, he said. This one covers the past 11 months. Arthur Hensley's handwriting filled most of the pages. The first half contained ordinary company figures, copied from bank statements, payment authorizations, and internal account summaries. The second half was different. Hensley had drawn columns comparing official expenses with actual withdrawals. The differences were not. Small $12,000 had been transferred in May, July $18,000 in September, $9,500 in November. The withdrawals continued through the winter, sometimes hidden as consulting fees, sometimes as claim adjustments, and sometimes as payments for warehouse inspections. That had never occurred. The total was $217,000. Every payment had passed through a company called Calder Business Services. Ever heard of it? I asked Bell. No, Kramer had. His men had begun checking it an hour earlier. Registered 7 months ago, he said. Mailing address is a rented box. Listed office is a room above a shoe store, but no one works there. The company has no employees, no equipment, and no visible business. Owner? A lawyer filed the papers for an unnamed client. Which lawyer? Kramer's mouth tightened. Howard Pike, Daniel Mercer's lawyer. Bell took out his notebook. That is convenient. Too convenient, I said. Kramer gave me an unfriendly look. You people have learned one phrase and intend to wear it out. The ledger contained copies of authorization numbers beside each transfer. Some had been approved with Daniel Mercer's initials. Others carried Stephen Vale's. 3 appeared to bear Arthur Hensley's own authorization. Bell examined the entries. If these are genuine, all 3 partners participated. If they are genuine, I said. Pearlie turned to the final written page. Hensley had added a note beneath the last transfer. Authorization sequence false. Originals replaced after approval. Account access through internal code M17. Confirm identity before confrontation. Below that, he had written a date, the day he died. Beside the date were 2 times. 15. Claimant at 11:15. DM Bell looked at me. The missing appointments. Not both missing. The 11:15 entry was still in the book. Kramer said, DM is Daniel Mercer. Probably, Bell replied. Who else? Those initials could belong to anyone. They belong to the partner whose lawyer created the shell company. That is what we are expected to think. Kramer slapped the ledger shut. I do not care what you are expected to think. I care where the money went. A police accountant arrived carrying bank records. Calder Business Services had transferred most of the stolen funds within 24 hours of receiving them. The money passed through several temporary accounts before being withdrawn in certified checks. The checks had been collected by a man using the name David. Mordium Kramer's eyes became satisfied. There, it is. Bell was less pleased. Description? Male, around 50, heavy build, dark hair. Daniel Mercer was around 50, heavy and dark-haired. Identification photograph? I asked. None. Signature? David Moore. Witness? A bank clerk remembers him. After 11 months. The clerk remembers a large tip. Bell examined the accountant's report. Mercer would not need a false name matching his own initials. He might if he was arrogant, Kramer said, or someone chose those initials to point toward him. Kramer picked up the telephone to order Mercer brought in again. I moved around Hensley's desk. The filing cabinet stood against the wall opposite the safe. Anyone entering the room could see it, but moving it required strength, time, and knowledge of the hidden recess. How did Hensley get the ledger behind there? I asked. Bell looked at the cabinet. Probably after office hours. Why not put it in the safe? Because the person stealing the money might know the combination. That person also might know about the recess. Kramer paused with the receiver in his hand. Bell said, "Who knew?" Miriam Lane was the obvious answer. She managed office records and had worked for Hensley for 8 years. Mercer had occupied the adjoining room for more than 2 decades. Stephen Vale had grown up visiting the office with his father. Evelyn Hensley had once helped decorate the suite and might have seen alterations made to the wall. Caleb Ross had worked there 15 years earlier. The recess could have been old enough for all of them to know. I telephoned. Wolf, he answered after Fritz brought him from the plant rooms. I reported. The hidden compartment, the ledger, the transfers to Calder Business Services, Howard Pike's involvement, the false authorizations, the internal code M17, and the man using the name David Moore. Wolf listened without interruption. When I finished, he said, "How was the ledger positioned?" Wrapped in waxed paper, flat in the recess. Was the wrapping dusty? I asked Pearlie. The outside was dusty, he said. The fold underneath was clean. I passed that on. Wolf grunted. The package was opened recently. Bell came nearer to the telephone. Before or after Hensley's death? I asked. That cannot yet be known. Was the ledger hidden to preserve it, or concealed so that it would later be discovered? Bell found it because the cabinet had been replaced badly. Exactly. A person capable of removing a baseboard and finding a hidden compartment would probably be capable of returning a cabinet to its original. Marks. So the second set of marks was left. Deliberately. Perhaps, Kramer took the telephone from me. Wolf, we have Mercer's initials, Mercer's description, Mercer's lawyer, and Mercer's access code. You have an excess of Mercer. Wolf replied. You would complain if I brought you the murder weapon with his name engraved on it. I would complain especially then. Kramer's face reddened. What do you think the ledger proves? That Arthur Hensley discovered systematic theft. It does not prove who committed, though the money passed through a company created by Mercer's attorney. An attorney may file papers without knowing the true purpose of the company. Pike says Mercer was his client, does he? Kramer glanced at Bell. He will then ask why an experienced criminal attorney would create a fraudulent company under his own name and preserve documents leading directly to his client. Kramer's jaw worked. Wolf continued. The ledger is not merely evidence. It is a message. Someone has arranged for every road to arrive at Daniel Mercer. You think he is innocent? I think guilt should not require scenery. Kramer handed the receiver back to me. What do you want us to do? I asked Wolf. Bring me the ledger. Kramer considers it police property. Then bring me accurate photographs. And the bank records? All of them. Also obtain the original authorization forms. Not copies. Hensley wrote that the originals had been replaced. Then determine who controlled the forms before and after approval. Looked through the glass wall at the empty reception desk. Miriam Lane. She controlled the files, Wolf said. That does not mean she altered them. Mercer could enter the records room, as could Vale. And Hensley. Indeed. Wolf paused. Archie. Ask Mr. Bell whether the unauthorized transfers began before or after Hensley received the anonymous photocopy. Bell checked the dates, the transfers. Began 9 months before the photocopy arrived, I told Wolf. Then the anonymous sender did not begin the fraud. He discovered it, or participated, and later changed allegiance. Why send Hensley one old ledger page instead of evidence from the current theft? Because the old claim gave Hensley a reason to inspect dormant accounts. The sender wished him to discover the new theft himself. Bell took the receiver. Someone guided Hensley toward the fraud without naming the thief. Yes, Wolf said. And someone else warned him to stop. They may be the same person. They may. A man can pull and push the same object if he wishes it placed precisely. Bell frowned. You think Hensley was being directed toward a specific confrontation? I think his actions were anticipated. He received evidence, reopened old accounts, hired you, contacted me, concealed a ledger and scheduled meetings. Someone knew each step. Someone inside the office. Almost certainly, Wolf hung up. At noon, Kramer's men found another entry near the back of the ledger. It was written in shorthand, squeezed into the margin beside a transfer of $24,000. Ask M denied knowledge, V frightened. L has key. E must not know. 4 initials at M could mean Mercer, V could mean Vale, L could mean Lane, E could mean... Evelyn Arthur Hensley had reduced the people closest to him to single letters, perhaps because he trusted none of them with a full name. Bell read the line several times. Lane has the key, he said. To what? Kramer asked. The records room. The filing cabinet. The shell company. Or the mystery, I said. Kramer ordered Miriam Lane brought back to Riddle Street. She arrived at 1:15 accompanied by a policewoman. She looked tired but controlled. When Kramer showed her the ledger, the control cracked. Where did you find that? Behind the filing cabinet. She looked at the exposed recess and closed her eyes. You knew it was there, Bell said. Yes. Kramer stepped forward. Why didn't you tell us? Mr. Hensley made me promise. When? 3 weeks ago. He showed me the ledger and said that if anything happened to him, I was to wait until someone moved the cabinet. That makes no sense, Kramer said. It was a test. He believed the person stealing the money knew about the compartment. If the cabinet was moved after his death, the thief would be searching for the ledger. Bell looked at the duplicate marks in the carpet. Did Hensley move the cabinet when he hid it? Yes, I helped him. We marked the rear legs with pencil so we could return it exactly. Then someone moved it again. Miriam nodded and failed to put it back correctly. I said. Her face changed. No, that cannot be right. Why not? Because the cabinet was in the correct position when I came here yesterday morning. The room went silent. Bell spoke first. You are certain? I checked the pencil marks through the gap beside the wall. Mr. Hensley told me to check them every morning. That meant the cabinet had been moved after Miriam arrived yesterday, or after the police search began. Someone had entered the sealed office, opened the hidden compartment, examined the ledger, and replaced it badly while policemen, employees, and investigators moved through the suite. Kramer turned toward Pearlie. Get the access log. The office had not been empty. Daniel Mercer had been allowed inside with his lawyer. Stephen Vale had returned for questioning. Evelyn Hensley had entered briefly to collect personal papers. Miriam Lane had been present. Bell had searched the desk. Police officers, technicians, and accountants had crossed the room all day. Any one of them might have moved the cabinet. Miriam touched the ledger through the evidence, covering. Mr. Hensley said this would identify the thief. It identifies everyone, I said. Bell stared at the list of initials in the margin. No, he replied. It identifies the people Arthur suspected. The thief is the person who knew Arthur had written their name. Outside, the office telephone began to ring. Nobody rushed to answer it. It rang a second time, then a third. Pearlie crossed into the outer room and lifted the receiver. He listened without speaking. "What is it?" Kramer called. Pearlie slowly lowered the telephone. The caller said, "We found the wrong book." Then the line went dead. Chapter 6. The Partner's Secret. Daniel Mercer's prosperity began to lose weight on Monday morning. From the outside, he had everything a successful businessman was expected to display. A large apartment overlooking the river, a country house in Connecticut, a chauffeur-driven car, memberships in 2 clubs, and suits that appeared never to have encountered weather. According to Arthur Bell, most of it belonged to banks, brokers, or patient men who had begun to lose patience. Bell arrived at the Brownstone shortly after 11 with a thick envelope and the expression of a man who had spent the morning learning that money could tell lies as easily as people. Wolf was at his desk, reading the photographs of Arthur Hensley's hidden ledger. "I was finishing the report on the anonymous caller who had announced that we had found the wrong book. The police had traced that call to another public telephone, this one in a railway terminal. No witness remembered the caller, though 3 remembered the hat. The hats were different. Bell sat in the red, leather chair and placed the envelope on his knee. "Daniel Mercer owes at least $480,000, he said. Wolf did not look up. "To whom?" "2 banks, a private lender, a brokerage house, and several men who prefer not to describe themselves as creditors. Then they should choose another occupation." Bell removed a stack of documents. Mercer borrowed heavily during the past 2 years. He lost money in copper, shipping shares and a land development in Florida. He borrowed against his apartment, his country house, his insurance policies, and his interest in Hensley and Mercer. I said, "He kept the suits. The tailor has not been paid." Wolf turned one of the ledger photographs toward the light. "Did Arthur Hensley know?" "Not at first. Mercer concealed most of the loans through separate companies. Hensley discovered part of the debt 3 months ago when a bank requested verification of Mercer's ownership share. That would give Mercer a reason to support the sale of the firm," I said. Bell nodded. "The proposed buyer offered enough to clear the company's obligations and pay each partner nearly $600,000. Hensley refused because he suspected the firm's accounts had been altered, meaning Mercer needed the sale before the theft was discovered. That is the obvious conclusion." Wolf's eyes lifted. "Obvious conclusions are not necessarily false, Mr. Bell. They are merely badly behaved." Bell spread the records across Wolf's desk. Several transfers listed in the hidden ledger had moved through Calder Business Services before reaching accounts connected indirectly to Mercer. One payment had gone to Hartwell Investment Company, which held Mercer's interest in the Florida development. Another had been used to satisfy interest owed to a private lender named Samuel Kern. A third had paid an insurance premium on Mercer's country house 2 days before the policy would have lapsed. None had gone directly into Mercer's personal account. All legitimate investments, according to Mercer, Bell said. "Made with stolen company funds?" I asked. "He denies the money was stolen. He claims Calder Business Services was created to manage confidential investments for Hensley and Mercer." "Did Hensley sign the agreement?" "There is no agreement," did Mercer. "He says the arrangement was verbal." Wolf lowered the photograph. "Who managed Calder?" "Mercer says Howard Pike. Mr. Pike says that he merely filed the incorporation papers and followed instructions." "Whose instructions?" Bell's mouth tightened. "He refuses to say." Wolf leaned back. "An attorney may protect a client's confidence. He may not use that protection to conceal his own participation in fraud. Kramer has already told him that, and Mr. Pike remains silent. Yes, then either loyalty has overcome judgment, or the identity of his client is more dangerous than a charge of obstruction." Bell selected 3 bank statements. The transfers to Mercer's interests total $92,000. He claims they were repayments of money he had previously advanced to the firm. Did he advance it? Wolf asked. "Company books show no such loans." "Personal records?" "None." "Witnesses?" Mercer named Hensley. The only witness was dead, which is sometimes convenient and always discourteous. I asked Bell whether the authorization numbers matched Mercer's office code. M17 they did, but not cleanly. The original authorization slips are missing. The copies contain Mercer's initials. The accountant says the sequence numbers were entered after the forms were approved, so someone replaced the forms. Yes, someone with access to company records. Mercer had access. Lane had access. Vale had limited access. Hensley had complete access. Wolf picked up one of the statements. What was the first payment connected to Mercer? $18,000 transferred through Calder in September. And when did his financial distress become acute? Bell checked a note. July. A private loan came due. He persuaded the lender to extend it for 60 days. So by September he needed money urgently. Yes. That is motive, not proof. Bell looked irritated. The hidden ledger leads to his debts. His lawyer formed the shell company. His authorization code appears on the transfers. The money paid his creditors, and each fact was available to Arthur Hensley before he died. Most of them. Then why did Hensley not confront Mercer earlier? He may have been gathering enough evidence. He had enough to dismiss him, report him, or prevent the sale. Bell had no answer. Wolf turned to me. Archie, telephone Mr. Mercer and invite him here. Invite or command. State that refusal will oblige me to send you to him. That should terrify him. It will annoy him. Annoyance is often more useful. Daniel Mercer arrived at 2:30 with Howard Pike. Mercer wore a dark blue suit, a white shirt, and the look of a man who had slept while being pursued. Pike carried a leather case and began objecting before he sat down. My client is cooperating with the police, he said. He is under no obligation to submit to questioning by private detectives. Wolf regarded him. Then take him away. Pike stopped. Mercer remained standing. You asked me here. I did. You came. Sit down or go. Mercer sat. Pike took the yellow chair beside him. Bell stayed in the red leather chair, and I remained at my desk with a notebook. Wolf placed a photograph of the ledger before Mercer. You owe nearly $500,000. Mercer's face hardened. My finances are private. Not when company money pays your creditors. That money was not stolen. What was it? Investment capital. Whose? The firm's. For what investment? Mercer looked at Pike. Pike said nothing. Wolf repeated the question. A series of private opportunities, Mercer said. Land, minerals, shipping securities. Why were they routed through Calder Business Services? To keep them separate from the ordinary accounts. Why? Because Arthur disliked speculative investments. Yet he agreed to them. Yes? Verbally? Yes. Without witnesses? Yes. Without contracts, minutes, memoranda, or entries in the company books? Mercer's jaw tightened. Arthur trusted me. He hired Mr. Bell to investigate the theft of records from his desk. That was another matter. Was it? Yes. What matter? I don't know. Wolf's brows rose a fraction. You have just claimed that Mr. Hensley trusted you with undocumented investments involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet he concealed a ledger recording those transfers and wrote that the authorization sequence was false. He misunderstood the bookkeeping. Did he misunderstand the money used to pay your lender? That was repayment of what? Advances I made. Produce evidence. While the records were private, produce them. They may have been destroyed. By whom? Mercer hesitated. Arthur. Bell shifted in his chair. Pike placed a hand on Mercer's sleeve, but Mercer pulled away. Wolf said, Why would Mr. Hensley destroy evidence proving that the company owed you money? He did not want the other partners to know. Mr. Vale owned only a minor share. Miss Lane was an employee. What other partners? Mercer stared at him. You referred to partners, Wolf continued. Plural. Hensley and Mercer had only 2 principal owners. If Hensley knew, there was no other partner from whom the advances needed to be concealed. I meant Vale. No. You meant what you said before you had time to improve it. Pike stood. This interview is over. Mercer did not move. Wolf looked at him. Did Arthur Hensley discover that you had borrowed against your ownership in the firm? Yes. When? 3 months ago. Did he threaten to remove you? No. Did he threaten to report the transfers? There were no unlawful transfers. Did he refuse the sale because he knew your debts would become public during an audit? Mercer's face had begun to shine. He refused because he was stubborn. Did you tell Mr. Pike to establish Calder Business Services? No. Pike turned toward him. Wolf saw it. So did Bell and I, Wolf said. Mr. Pike appears surprised. Mercer looked at the lawyer. You know what I mean. I know what you told me before coming here, Pike replied carefully. What did he tell you? I asked. Pike closed his case. That is confidential, Mercer said quickly. Arthur instructed Pike to form Calder. Bell leaned forward. You told Kramer that Calder was your idea. I said the investments were mine. The company structure was Arthur's. Why would Hensley create a shell company and then investigate its payments? Because he became suspicious of how Vale used it. That was new. Wolf folded his hands. Mr. Vale? Yes, Stephen handled several of the transactions. You previously said Mr. Pike managed them. He handled the legal work. Vale managed the transfers. Bell said, Vale had no authority to approve amounts above $5,000. Arthur gave him authority privately. Another verbal arrangement? Mercer glared at him. Not every decision in business is written down. The useful ones are, I said. Wolf's voice remained level. First you said Calder managed investments approved by Hensley. Then you said Mr. Pike managed Calder. Now you say Mr. Vale managed the transfers. You claim the payments to your creditors were repayments of undocumented advances, and that Hensley destroyed the evidence proving them. Your explanations are not merely inconsistent. They are competitive. Mercer rose. I will not sit here and be insulted. Then stand and be exposed, Pike said. Daniel? Mercer turned on him. You told me this was protected. The room became still. Pike's face changed, though only slightly. Wolf said, What was protected? Mercer realized what he had said. He sat again. Nothing. Mr. Mercer, Wolf said, your partner was murdered shortly before he intended to confront someone about fraudulent transfers. Those transfers relieved your debts. Your lawyer created the company through which they passed. You expected the telephone call at 9:10 and lied about what the caller said. You now offer explanations that change whenever the previous one fails. If you are innocent of murder, you are making innocence unnecessarily difficult. Mercer pressed his palms against his knees. I did not kill Arthur. Who did? I don't know. Who owned Calder? I told you. You have told me 3 things. Mercer looked at Pike again. This time Pike did not return the look. Wolf said, Did Arthur Hensley ask you to meet him at 11:15 on the night he died? No. Then what did DM mean? David Moore. The false name used to collect Calder's checks. Yes. Who was David Moore? I don't know. You expected him? Mercer shook his head. Then why did you identify the initials without hesitation? Mercer's mouth opened and closed. Bell stood. You knew David Moore existed before the police found the bank records. Pike seized his client's arm. Do not answer. Mercer pulled free again, Arthur told me. When? Bell asked. The afternoon he died. He said David Moore would call at 9:10. That contradicted his earlier claim that Hensley had merely promised the caller would give him a name. I read the old statement from my notebook. Mercer listened and looked toward the door. Wolf said, You have now given us a 4th account of the call. Mercer's control broke. All right. Arthur said Moore would call. He told me to answer and arrange a meeting. Where? He did not say. What did the caller tell you? Nothing. You answered, no, he cannot come to the telephone. I thought someone was there. You did not ask who was calling. I panicked. Before discovering Hensley was dead. Mercer stopped. Bell's eyes narrowed. You knew Arthur was dead when the telephone rang? No, you said you panicked. Why, if you believed your partner was alive in the next room? Mercer looked at Pike. This time the lawyer stood and spoke quietly. We are leaving. Wolf did not object. Mercer rose, but before he reached the door, Wolf spoke. The funds paid your debts, Mr. Mercer. That makes you either the thief or the bait. Mercer turned. What does that mean? It means someone may have used your desperation to conceal a larger purpose. Decide which is more dangerous, telling the truth to me or allowing the murderer to believe. You still possess it. Mercer's face went gray. Pike, let him out. Bell remained standing until the front door closed. He knows who owns. Calder, he said. Yes, Wolf replied. And he knew Hensley was dead before the call. Probably. Then why not tell Kramer to arrest him? Because Mr. Mercer's lies do not fit comfortably around the murder. I put down my notebook. He needed money. The stolen money paid his debts. His lawyer created the shell company. He lied about the call and the meeting. How uncomfortable do you need? Wolf picked up the photograph of the ledger. Arthur Hensley wrote, Asked M denied knowledge. If M is Mercer. Hensley asked him about the transfers and Mercer denied knowing of them. He was lying. Possibly. But Hensley then wrote, V frightened, L has key, E must not know. He was distinguishing roles. One denied, one feared, one held a key, one was to remain ignorant, Bell sat again. You think Mercer benefited without controlling the fraud. I think the person responsible intended investigators to find Mercer's debts. Every transfer connected to him was routed through several accounts, yet each path can now be followed. A competent thief hides money. This thief arranged a trail. To frame Mercer? Perhaps. Or to bind him. I said, pay his debts with stolen funds, then threaten to expose him. Wolf nodded. A debtor makes a useful servant. He can be instructed to answer a telephone, repeat a lie, sign an authorization, or remain silent. Bell looked toward the hall, through which Mercer had left. Then Mercer may know the murderer but be too frightened to name him, or too guilty of another crime. The telephone rang. Answered. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Daniel Mercer's voice came through, low and strained. Goodwin. Yes. I want to speak to Wolf alone. Start with me. No. Tell him I know what the wrong book is. I glanced at Wolf. Where are you? I asked. Mercer breathed hard. At my apartment. Come tonight at 9. Bring no police and do not bring Bell. Why not now? Because I have to find something first. What? The book Arthur meant to show Wolf. A sound came over the line, sharp and close, like a door opening quickly. Mercer stopped breathing. Daniel? I said. The line went dead. I was already reaching for my coat when Wolf said, Archie. I turned. Take Mr. Bell. Mr. Mercer's prohibition was not intended for us. Bell was at the door before I was. Behind us. Wolf lifted the hidden ledger and studied the photographed figures once more. Daniel Mercer's debts had given him a motive for theft and murder. His lies had given the police a path to his door, but someone had paid his creditors with stolen money, and someone had made sure Arthur Hensley recorded every step. Whether Mercer was the thief, the murderer, or merely a frightened man tied to both, he had finally decided to reveal the second ledger. The question was whether we would reach him before the person who had ordered his silence. Chapter 7. The call that came every week. Arthur Bell and I reached Daniel Mercer's apartment at 9:23. The building overlooked the East River and employed enough marble, brass and uniforms to suggest that no unpleasant event could occur without first obtaining permission from the management. The elevator operator recognized Mercer and said he had returned shortly before 8 with Howard Pike. Pike had left 15 minutes later. No one else had entered through the main lobby. That information would have been comforting if New York buildings had only one door. Mercer's apartment was on the 12th floor. The door stood open by 2 inches. Bell looked at me, I looked at the door, and neither of us wasted time discussing etiquette. The entrance hall was dark. Mercer. I called, no answer. I switched on the light. A table had been overturned, a framed picture hung crooked, and a telephone receiver lay on the carpet at the end of its cord. The sharp sound I had heard before Mercer's line went dead had probably been the apartment door striking the wall. Bell moved toward the sitting room. I went the other way, past a dining room large enough for Mercer's creditors to hold a convention. We found him in the study. He was lying beside an open desk with blood above his right ear. He was breathing. A small bronze statue lay on the carpet near his hand. One corner of its base was dark. Bell knelt beside him, alive. That will disappoint several accountants. I telephoned for an ambulance and then called Kramer. By the time I returned to the study, Bell was examining the desk without touching it. The drawers had been emptied. Papers covered the carpet. A wall safe stood open, though cash, jewelry, and negotiable bonds remained inside. Not robbery, Bell said. Someone wanted the book. The wrong book. Mercer stirred before the ambulance arrived. His eyes opened and failed to recognize either of us. Daniel, Bell said. Who hit you? Mercer tried to lift his head. I stopped him. The book, he whispered. What book? Arthur's call book. Where is it? His eyes moved toward the desk. Gone. Who took it? Mercer's mouth worked, but no answer came. He lost consciousness again. Kramer arrived with Pearlie, 2 detectives. and enough irritation to fill the apartment. He saw Mercer on the floor and turned on me. "You were supposed to bring no police." "That was Mercer's request, not mine." "Who knew you were coming?" "Wolf, Bell, Mercer, and anyone listening to Mercer's telephone." Kramer stared at the broken receiver. The telephone line had not been cut. According to the building operator, a call had reached Mercer at 9:11, shortly before Bell and I arrived. No one knew who had placed it. The apartment had a service entrance beside the kitchen. Its lock showed fresh scratches. A person could have entered through the freight elevator without appearing in the main lobby. Kramer's men searched every room. They found no second ledger, no call book, and no sign of Howard Pike's confidential client. They did find 3 overdue loan notices, a pistol in a bedroom drawer, and a calendar with every Thursday evening marked by a small black circle. The circles began 11 months earlier. Bell placed the calendar beneath a desk lamp. Most Thursdays were marked without explanation. On 6 of them, Mercer had added a time. 40. The same time appeared beside every marked date. Did Hensley call Mercer every Thursday? Kramer asked. Bell shook his head. Miriam Lane may know. Mercer was taken to the hospital under police guard. His injury was serious but not immediately dangerous. The doctor said he would probably regain full consciousness by morning. He did not. He drifted in and out for 2 days, recognizing Pike once and Kramer not at all. When I visited, he opened his eyes long enough to tell me that Wolf was looking at the wrong column. Then he went back to sleep before explaining which column or why. By Thursday morning, Bell had gathered copies of Mercer's calendars for the previous 3 years. The weekly circles appeared only during the period covered by Hensley's hidden ledger. That was when Miriam Lane remembered the calls. She was sitting in Wolf's office at 11:20, wearing a grey dress instead of green, and looking as though sleep had become an unreliable acquaintance. Bell had placed Mercer's calendar on the edge of Wolf's desk. Wolf sat behind it with his fingertips touching. "You recognize the time?" he asked. Miriam nodded slowly. "Every Thursday at 6:40 the private line rang." "Every Thursday?" "Nearly every Thursday. I had forgotten because it became part of the office routine." "Routine is memory's enemy," Wolf said. "Describe it." "The call came on Mr. Hensley's direct line. It did not pass through the main switchboard, but a small signal lamp appeared on my telephone whenever the private line was in use." "Did Mr. Hensley answer personally?" "Always." "What did he say?" "I rarely heard more than the beginning. Usually he said, 'Yes, I have the figures,' or 'Go ahead.' Then he closed his door." "Did he speak for long?" 3 or 4 minutes, sometimes less." "What happened afterward?" Miriam looked at Bell. "Mr. Hensley usually went to the records room. On some evenings he asked me for authorization forms. On others he told me to prepare a bank transfer for the next morning." Bell opened the photographed hidden ledger. He read the dates aloud. The first unauthorized transfer had been recorded on Thursday, July 9th. The next appeared on Thursday, July 23rd. Others followed on Thursdays in August, September, November, January, February and March. Miriam recognized each date. The calls came on. All of those evenings, Bell drew a line beside the entries. The call at 6:40 on July 9th had been followed by a $12,000 transfer authorization at 6:52. The September call had been followed by an $18,000 EU authorization at 6:48. The November call had preceded the $9,500 transfer by 14 minutes. On 2 occasions, however, the money had moved before the call. That interested Wolf. "Who prepared the transfers?" he asked. "Sometimes I did," Miriam said. "Sometimes Mr. Hensley prepared them himself." "Did you know the money was going to Calder Business Services?" "Not at first. The name appeared to be an ordinary consulting company." "When did you become suspicious?" "In January. I noticed that 3 payments used almost identical invoice numbers. Mr. Hensley told me not to discuss it with anyone." "Did you tell Mercer?" "No." "Vale?" "No." "Mrs. Hensley?" "Certainly not." Wolf's brows rose. "Why, certainly." Miriam hesitated. Mr. Hensley was especially anxious that his wife know nothing about the accounts. That matched the note in the hidden ledger. "He must not know." Bell leaned forward. "Did the Thursday caller ever give a name?" "Not to me." "Did Hensley call the person back?" "Once." The room's attention sharpened. "When?" Bell asked. "About 6 weeks before he died. The usual call did not come at 6:40. Mr. Hensley waited until 7, then became agitated. He asked me to connect him to a number he had written on a card. What number? I do not remember. What happened to the card? He burned it in the ashtray after the call. What did he say? I heard him say, "You promised to keep Mercer out of it." Then he closed the door. Bell glanced at Wolf. That suggests the caller was controlling the transfers, or reporting them, Wolf replied. Miriam continued. After that conversation, Mr. Hensley asked me for all payment records connected to Mr. Mercer's personal investments. That was when he began the private ledger. The hidden ledger began 11 months ago, I said. The first half did. He used it as an ordinary record book at first. He began adding the comparisons. And notes after that call. Wolf picked up a photograph of the ledger, so the weekly calls existed before Hensley understood their purpose. Yes, and after he became suspicious, he continued accepting them. He wanted to discover who was behind Calder. Bell said, "He let the fraud continue." "For a time," Miriam replied. "He said stopping the transfers too early would warn the person responsible." Wolf's lips tightened. Arthur Hensley's method had not impressed him. Did Mr. Hensley record the calls anywhere besides the hidden ledger? Miriam looked at the calendar recovered from Mercer's apartment. He kept a small red book in the locked drawer of his desk. He wrote down the time of each private call, the amount discussed, and a few words about what the caller said. "The call book," Bell said. "Yes, that is what Mercer was searching for before he was attacked." Miriam's face changed. "Mr. Mercer knew about it." "Apparently. I never told him. Who else knew?" Wolf asked. "No one, as far as I know." "Where was it on the night of the murder?" "In the locked drawer. It was not found there. Then the killer took it." Wolf shook his head. "Do not promote an assumption to a fact. Miss Lane. Mr. Hensley may have removed it. Mr. Mercer may have taken it. The person who searched his apartment may have found it there," Bell said. "Mercer told us he had to find something before speaking. That must have been the call book." "Probably," I asked Miriam, whether the weekly caller's voice resembled the voice used in the warnings. I never heard enough of the Thursday caller to know. Mr. Hensley once said it was a woman, but I thought he was joking. Bell stopped writing. "A woman," he said. "Our invisible bookkeeper is a woman with a better memory than most bankers." "Why didn't you mention that before?" "You never asked about the weekly calls." "Until I saw the circles on Mr. Mercer's calendar. I had not connected them to the threats or the murder." Wolf closed his eyes. The possibility of a woman caller changed the appearance of the list without reducing it. Miriam Lane was a woman. Evelyn Hensley was a woman. So were dozens of clerks, operators, accountants, and secretaries who might have known the transfers. Bell spread the transfer records across the desk. The calls came at 6:40. The authorizations followed between 6:48 and 7:05. The funds were usually withdrawn or redirected the following morning. "Usually?" Wolf asked. 2 transfers were completed before the Thursday call. "Exactly how long before?" Bell checked. One at 6:29. The other at 6:34. Wolf opened his eyes. "Then the caller did not always authorize the transfer." Bell frowned. "Why not?" "Because on those 2 evenings the action had already occurred. A command given after obedience is ceremonial. The caller could have been confirming it, yes, or checking that Hensley had discovered it." I looked at the columns. Maybe Hensley wasn't the thief's partner. Maybe he was being forced to approve transfers that had already been arranged. Miriam shook her head. "No one could force Mr. Hensley." "Everyone can be forced," Wolf said. "The question is what pressure is applied." Bell tapped the old North Atlantic export entry. "The Ross case." Wolf nodded. If Hensley believed he had helped imprison an innocent man, the evidence could be used against him. The caller may have offered silence in exchange for cooperation. Miriam looked sick. Mr. Hensley would never steal money. "He may not have considered it theft at first," Wolf said. Calder could have been presented as a temporary account for repaying a concealed obligation. By the time he understood, his own signatures tied him to the fraud. Bell turned pages. "But why direct payments toward Mercer's debts?" "To make Mercer vulnerable," I said. "Or to place the appearance of guilt upon him," Wolf added. At 12:30, I telephoned the company's bank and asked for the exact processing times of every Calder transfer. Bell and I spent the afternoon comparing them with telephone company records. The pattern was tighter than we expected. At 6:40 each Thursday, the call reached Hensley's private line. At 6:43, someone accessed the company's dormant claims account using internal code M17. Between 6:48 and 7:05, an authorization was entered. At 9 the following morning, Calder Business Services received the money. The weekly caller knew when the account had been accessed, when the authorization was entered, and how much would move. That knowledge could not have come from guesswork. Only 4 people had routine access to that information: Arthur Hensley, Daniel Mercer, Miriam Lane, and the bank officer assigned to the company accounts. The bank officer's name was Eleanor West. Bell found her personnel record at 4:15. She had handled Hensley and Mercer's accounts for 14 years, including the North Atlantic export claim. She had also testified at Caleb Ross's trial. Wolf read the report and rang for beer. "Do not become enamored of Miss West," he said. She knew the old fraud. "The current accounts and every transfer time," Bell replied. "She is therefore important." "Importance is not guilt. She could have made the calls. So could Miss Lane." Miriam, who had remained in the office, stiffened. Bell said, "Lane was often sitting outside Hensley's door when the calls came. A person may arrange a call in advance." "I did not," Miriam said. Wolf ignored the interruption. "Mrs. Hensley may also have possessed the information through her husband. Mr. Vale may have obtained it through records. Mercer certainly knew something, since he marked the calls on his calendar." Bell looked at the black circles. Why would Mercer record them if he was not involved? Perhaps Hensley instructed him to. Perhaps he discovered the pattern independently. Perhaps the circles were made by someone else. The calendars were in his apartment. Objects do not acquire honesty from their location. At 6:20 that evening, Wolf ordered Fritz to bring sandwiches and coffee to the office. He had decided that we would wait for the weekly call. It was Thursday. Miriam sat in the red leather chair. Bell occupied the yellow one. Kramer and Pearlie arrived at 6:30, after I told them that failing to appear might allow us to solve the case without them. Kramer did not appreciate the possibility. The telephone company had placed a trace on the private line at Riddle Street, but Wolf insisted that a second line in our office remain available. He had no reason to believe the caller would contact the brownstone, which was one of his reasons for expecting it. At 6:39, nobody spoke. The minute hand on the wall clock moved. At precisely 6:40, the telephone rang. Miriam flinched. I lifted the receiver. Archie Goodwin. For 2 seconds there was only the faint sound of the line. Then a woman's voice said, "Mr. Wolf has the figures." The voice was low and flat, possibly disguised. "Mr. Wolf has many figures," I said. "Which ones interest you?" "The Thursday transfers." Bell rose. Kramer moved toward the extension telephone, but Wolf stopped him with a gesture. I said, "There will be no transfer tonight." "I know." "Who are you?" "Ask Arthur Bell why the first payment was never entered in the hidden ledger." Bell's face lost color. I looked at him. The caller continued. "The ledger begins too late. The theft began before Calder existed. Where is the earlier record?" "Daniel Mercer found it." "Is that the call book?" "No, it is the wrong book." Wolf leaned forward. I asked, "What is the right book?" The woman gave a small laugh without humor. "The one Arthur Hensley died before he could read. The line went dead. The trace failed." The call had been routed through 3 exchanges and placed from a public telephone. Kramer demanded to know why the caller had named Bell. Bell did not answer immediately. Wolf looked at him. "Mr. Bell?" Bell stared at the black circles on Mercer's calendar. "When Hensley hired me," he said, "he gave me copies of the last 11 months of accounts. I assumed that was the complete period under investigation." "You never examined earlier transfers?" Kramer asked. "Hensley told me Calder was formed 11 months ago. There was no reason to look earlier." "The caller says there." Yes, Wolf's voice was quiet, and the caller knew precisely what Hensley gave you. Bell met his eyes. "Only Hensley and I knew that." "No," Wolf said. "Someone else knew everything Hensley did on Thursday evenings. The calls, the figures, the transfer times, the hidden ledger, your investigation. Mercer's search and our presence here tonight," Miriam whispered. "How?" Wolf looked at the silent telephone. Because the weekly caller was not merely watching the fraud. He folded his hands over his middle. The weekly caller was keeping the accounts. Chapter 8. The trap behind the telephone. The Thursday caller had given us information, But information from an anonymous voice is like money found in an alley. A sensible man examines it before spending it. At 9 the next morning, Arthur Bell and I returned to the offices of Hensley and Mercer. Inspector Kramer met us there with Pearlie Stebbins and a telephone company technician named Walter Briggs. Briggs was a narrow man with rimless spectacles and fingers that moved constantly, as though searching the air for loose wires. Miriam Lane had given Kramer permission to open every cabinet, partition, and telephone box in the suite. Daniel Mercer remained in the hospital, conscious only at intervals. Howard Pike had stationed himself beside Mercer's bed and objected whenever anyone asked a question containing a verb. Kramer pointed Briggs toward Arthur Hensley's private telephone. Take it apart. Briggs removed the lower plate, examined the wiring and frowned. This instrument was altered. Bell came closer. How? A secondary connection was added and later removed. See these 2 screw marks? A pair of wires ran from the receiver circuit through the back of the desk. Where did they go? I asked. Briggs followed a narrow groove cut beneath the carpet. The groove ended at the wall separating Hensley's office from a small records room. Inside the records room, behind a shelf of old claim files, he found an empty metal bracket and 4 inches of severed wire. Something was mounted here, he said. Probably an extension receiver or recording unit. Kramer looked at Bell. Did Hensley own recording equipment? Bell shook his head. Not that I knew. Miriam stood in the doorway. Her face went pale when she saw the wires. I know what was there. Everyone turned. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Hensley asked me to order a small wire recorder through a private supplier. He said it was for dictation. What happened to it? Kramer asked. I installed it in this room under his instructions. The telephone connection allowed the machine to record calls made on his private line. Why didn't you tell us? I did not know it was gone. Mr. Hensley told me never to enter this room while the recorder was operating. Bell examined the empty bracket. When did he use it? Every Thursday evening. There it was. The weekly caller had not merely spoken to Hensley. Hensley had begun preserving the conversations. Kramer asked where the recordings were kept. In a locked metal box beneath the recorder. There was no box. Who knew about it? Bell asked. Only Mr. Hensley and I. Wolf would have said that statement established nothing except Miriam's willingness to make it. I said it for him. You installed equipment in a company records room. Someone could have noticed? Miriam nodded reluctantly. Mr. Vale came in once. While I was adjusting the shelf, Mr. Mercer may have seen the supplier's invoice. Mrs. Hensley visited the office the day the machine arrived. And the telephone company connection? Briggs asked. Mr. Hensley installed it himself from written instructions. Briggs examined the cut ends of wire. The recorder was removed recently. The copper is still bright. Before or after the murder? Kramer asked. Within the past week. I cannot be closer than that. Bell went to Hensley's desk and stood behind the dead man's chair. Arthur recorded the weekly calls because he suspected the person on the line was connected to the transfers. He then arranged a final meeting. At 8:15, I said. Kramer took out the appointment book. The torn line remained unreadable except for the pressure marks. Bell placed a blank sheet over the following page and studied it under a low lamp. The first letter may not be R, he said. Here it could be Eames Eleanor West, Kramer said. The bank officer had been questioned twice. She admitted calling Hensley about company business, but denied making regular Thursday calls. She also denied knowing that Calder Business Services received company funds. Her denial had impressed nobody. Miriam approached the desk. On the evening Mr. Hensley died. The 6:40 call was different. You heard it? Bell asked. Only part. I was preparing to leave when the private line rang. Mr. Hensley answered and said, The figures are complete. There will be no more payments. What did he say next? He listened for several seconds. Then he said, No, you will come here at 8:15 and bring the original book. Bell looked toward the empty recorder bracket. The right book. Possibly, I said. Miriam continued. After he hung up, he asked whether the records room was locked. I told him it was. He then telephoned Mr. Bell. Bell nodded. At 6:15, he had already told me to come at 9. You said Hensley called you at 6:15, Kramer replied. That was before the weekly call. Yes, he expected something to happen during it. What exactly did he tell you? Bell hesitated. Kramer's voice hardened. So this is a poor time to become private. He said he had arranged a test. If it succeeded, he would have proof that the theft required 2 people, one inside the company and one outside it. Why didn't you tell us that before? Because he did not explain the test. He told me to arrive at 9, wait in the records room and listen to a telephone call. Kramer stared at him. You knew about the telephone trap. I knew Hensley intended me to hear a call. I did not know he had installed recording equipment. You were supposed to arrive before the 9:10 call. Yes. But Miss Lane found the body first and telephoned me. I came immediately. Bell's account fitted the physical evidence. Hensley had expected Bell at 9. The written reminder beneath the telephone cord, call at 9:10, had not been intended for Mercer. It had reminded Hensley when Bell's demonstration would occur. Hensley planned to place Bell in the records room, concealed behind the wall, while the telephone connection carried the call into the hidden recorder. Bell would hear the voice and the words. The machine would preserve them. Why use Bell as a witness when he had recordings? Pearlie asked. The earlier recordings may not identify the caller, I said. The voice was disguised. Bell nodded. Hensley intended to force the person to speak without the device. How? Kramer asked. By forcing the outside caller to send the inside conspirator, Daniel Mercer, to the office at 8:15. Hensley intended to confront Mercer first, and then use the 9:10 signal to expose the person directing him. We began reconstructing the evening. At 5:30, Arthur Hensley had carried the brown portfolio into Daniel Mercer's office. The portfolio contained copies of transfer records, the anonymous ledger page, and possibly the missing call book. Hensley returned without it, suggesting that he had hidden it in Mercer's room or given it to someone he expected to retrieve later. At 6:15, Hensley telephoned Bell and ordered him to arrive at 9. At 6:40, the weekly call came through. Hensley announced that he had completed the figures and demanded that the caller come to the office at 8:15 with the original book. At 7:20, he telephoned Evelyn Hensley and warned her not to visit the office. Shortly afterward, he suspended the answering service so the later call would reach his private line directly. At 8:15, the visitor arrived. By 8:42, Arthur Hensley was dead. The wire recorder and its locked box had disappeared. The brown portfolio was missing. The appointment line had been torn from the book. The photograph of Caleb Ross had been removed. Yet the person who searched the office had overlooked the hidden ledger behind the filing cabinet, or had deliberately left it to be discovered. Then the telephone rang. The call was not a mistake, Bell said. It was the second part of the test, or the conspirator's routine, Wolf said from the doorway. None of us had heard him enter. He stood beside Fritz, who had driven him downtown after Wolf finally accepted that the telephone mechanism could not be carried conveniently to West 35th Street. Wolf regarded the office with disapproval. Its chairs were inadequate, its air was stale, and someone had placed a dead plant near the window. Fritz arranged the largest available chair behind Miriam's desk. Wolf lowered himself into it and looked at the exposed telephone wires. Kramer said, "You could have stayed home." I tried. Wolf turned to Bell. "Your reconstruction is incomplete." Why did the later caller remain silent? Bell answered, "Because Mercer spoke first." That describes the event. It does not explain it. Wolf asked Briggs whether a caller could know which telephone had answered, not from the line itself. Then the caller expected a particular person to be present. "Mercer," I said. Wolf nodded. The caller did not telephone to speak with Hensley. The caller telephoned to receive a signal from the person inside the office. Kramer folded his arms. Mercer said Hensley ordered him to answer. Mr. Mercer has supplied several versions. None deserves shelter. Bell repeated Mercer's exact words. No, he cannot come to the telephone. Wolf's lips tightened. That was not an improvised response. It was a report that Hensley was dead? Pearlie asked. Not necessarily. It may have meant that Hensley was absent, watched, suspicious, or no longer under control. The essential fact is that Mercer answered before the caller spoke. Therefore, the phrase itself carried the message. Kramer said, then Mercer was one of the conspirators. He participated in their routine. That is not identical. He took their money. His creditors took it. Mr. Mercer may have accepted the benefit, or the transfers may have been used to bind him. Bell looked at the weekly transfer chart. 2 people were required. Someone inside Hensley and Mercer entered the authorizations. Someone at the bank or outside the company moved the money through Calder. Exactly, Wolf said. Every Thursday the outside person called at 6:40. Figures were exchanged. The inside person accessed account code M17. The transfer was prepared. Later, a second contact confirmed that the process remained safe. The 910 call, I said. Yes, Kramer frowned. There was not a 910 call every Thursday. Not on the company telephone records, Wolf replied. That does not mean no signal occurred. The second call may have been made to Mercer's apartment, his club, or a public office. On the night of the murder, Hensley deliberately redirected the routine to his private office line. Bell stood very still. That was his trap. Wolf nodded. Hensley had learned enough to understand the conspirator's procedure. He told the outside participant that the usual confirmation must be made at 9:10 to his private telephone. He intended Bell to hear it from the records room, and he planned to have the inside conspirator present, I said. Indeed, the 8:15 meeting was designed to ensure cooperation. Hensley would confront one participant, display the records, and compel that person to remain until the later call exposed the other, Miriam whispered. But he was killed before Bell arrived. Yes. Wolf looked toward Hensley's chair. The visitor came prepared. Hensley was given a sedative, probably in the water already on his desk. While his reactions slowed, the visitor demanded the records and the recordings. Hensley resisted or threatened exposure. He was shot with his own pistol. Kramer said, "You cannot know the visitor drugged him. The visitor needed time to search without a struggle. The sedative provided it." Hensley did not habitually drug himself before meeting a detective, a criminal associate, and me. What happened after the shooting? Bell asked. The killer removed the recorder, the call box, the appointment entry, the brown portfolio if it was present, and anything that identified the weekly voice. But the killer could not cancel the 910 call without warning the second conspirator that something had gone wrong. So the call still came, I said, and Mercer rushed to answer. Wolf turned his gaze toward Mercer's empty office. Mr. Mercer knew the signal was due. He may have been instructed to attend the office after the murder, or he may have arrived independently and discovered what had occurred. When the telephone rang, habit and fear moved him before caution could interfere. Bell said, the caller expected Mercer's coded response. Yeah, and hung up without speaking, because the message had already been delivered. Precisely, Kramer. Paced to the window and back. Then the caller was the outside conspirator, and the killer was the person who met Hensley at 8:15. Possibly. Possibly. The outside caller may also have been the visitor. A person can leave this office, reach a public booth, and make a call. Alternatively, the visitor may have telephoned a partner before leaving. We know the system required at least 2 people. We do not yet know which one killed Hensley. Bell looked at the severed telephone wires. The murderer took the recordings because they contained the weekly voice. Wolf nodded. But the anonymous woman who telephoned us last Thursday knew the first transfer was missing from the ledger, Bell continued. She either heard the recordings, made the calls, or kept the real accounts. Correct. And she said the right book was one Hensley died before he could read. Wolf's eyes narrowed. That statement contains a difficulty. What difficulty? If Hensley never read the book, how did the caller know what it contained? No one answered. Wolf continued. The caller has presented herself as a distant observer who wishes to guide us, but she knows the contents of Hensley's hidden ledger, what he gave Mr. Bell, what Mercer found, and what was removed from this office. She is not observing the conspiracy. She is within it, Kramer said. Eleanor West. Do not clutch the first available woman. She handled the bank account. So did several clerks under her authority. Miss Lane handled the company files. Mrs. Hensley may have learned through her husband. A woman's voice can be imitated, and a distorter was conveniently found. Bell walked to the telephone. Hensley believed the weekly caller was a woman. He told Miss Lane so. Whether he believed it is another matter. Wolf asked Briggs to reconnect the private line and reproduce the signal lamp on Miriam's desk. The technician worked for 20 minutes, muttering at wires. When he finished, he called the private number. From the outer office, the telephone on. Hensley's desk rang. A small lamp on Miriam's instrument glowed. Wolf watched it. Again, Briggs called a second time. The lamp glowed. Before the bell sounded, Bell leaned closer. "It lights first. By nearly 1 second," Briggs said. "The signal current reaches the lamp before the bell mechanism completes." I remembered Daniel Mercer crossing the room. Before the first ring had finished, he saw the lamp. Wolf nodded. Mr. Mercer did not merely react to the sound. He was watching for the signal. Kramer's face became hard. "That puts him in it." "Yes, it proves he expected the call. Enough for arrest. For conspiracy, perhaps. Not for murder." The technician disconnected his equipment. Wolf remained focused on the lamp. Arthur Hensley had constructed a trap with 3 parts: the concealed recorder, the witness waiting in the records room, and the signal call at 9:10. The killer removed the first part and prevented the second by killing Hensley before Bell arrived, but the third part had continued automatically. The telephone rang because the conspirators trusted their routine more than they feared discovery. Mercer saw the signal lamp and answered with the prepared phrase. The silent caller received the warning and disappeared. The trap had failed to save Arthur Hensley. It had succeeded in proving that Daniel Mercer was not alone. Wolf rose with Fritz's assistance and looked at Bell. "Arrange for Mr. Mercer to be brought to my office as soon as his doctor permits." "Who else?" "Mrs. Hensley, Miss Lane, Mr. Vale, Mr. Pike, Miss West, and Caleb Ross if the police can locate him." Kramer said, "You are planning one of your gatherings. I am planning to hear several people lie in the same room. Comparison improves the quality. You still do not know who killed Hensley." Wolf looked once more at the telephone. "No, but the murderer believes the essential recording was destroyed, wasn't it? The machine and wire spools were taken. Then what remains?" Wolf moved toward the door. "A routine, Mr. Kramer. A routine is a record written in human conduct. People may burn paper, remove books, and cut wires, but they continue to perform the acts that have protected them." He stopped beside the outer desk. The murderer answered the wrong telephone. That was all he would say. By evening, Bell had begun assembling the suspects. Mercer's doctor agreed that he could leave the hospital for 1 hour under supervision. Eleanor West accepted after Kramer threatened a formal order. Stephen Vale protested. Miriam Lane remained silent, and Evelyn Hensley said she would come because she wanted the truth. Howard Pike demanded to know whether the gathering was official. Told him nothing in Wolf's office was official, except the dinner schedule. Caleb. Ross was still missing, yet shortly before midnight, a message arrived at the brownstone. It contained no signature and only one sentence: "The man you are seeking will come when the telephone rings." Wolf read it, placed it on his desk, and rang for beer. The final trap had begun. Chapter 9. Why Daniel answered Arthur Bell. Found the pattern because Daniel Mercer had lied about where he spent Thursday evenings. Bell arrived at the brownstone shortly before noon, carrying copies of telephone records, club registers, hotel receipts, and witness statements. Wolf was in the plant rooms, so Bell spread the papers across my desk and began arranging them by date. Mercer said he usually remained at the Carlton Club on Thursdays until 10. Bell said, "That sounds comfortable." It is also false. According to the club register, Mercer had often left shortly after 8:30. On other Thursdays, he remained in the building but moved from the dining room to a private reading room containing a telephone. Twice he had instructed the desk clerk to transfer an expected call to the lobby booth. Every change occurred before 9:10. Bell placed Mercer's calendar beside the records. The black circles at 6:40 marked the first weekly call to Arthur Hensley, but smaller pencil dots appeared near the bottom of many Thursday squares. Each dot stood beside 9:10. The scheme used 2 weekly calls, Bell said. The 6:40 call arranged or confirmed the transfer. The 9:10 call reported whether the transaction had passed. Safely. That is what Wolf suspected. I prefer documents. You and Wolf may have to settle that with pistols. Bell ignored me and opened a club. Employee's statement. Daniel Mercer had received telephone calls at precisely 9:10 on 7 Thursdays during the previous 5 months. The caller never gave a name. Mercer always answered personally, spoke briefly, and returned to the dining room. On 3 other Thursdays, calls reached his apartment at the same time. 2 more had gone to the office of Howard Pike. The destination changed. But the time did not. The 910 call on the night of Arthur Hensley's murder had not been an unusual event. Only its destination was different. Hensley had directed the familiar signal to his own office because he intended Bell to hear it through the concealed connection. At 12:30, Wolf came down from the Orchids. Bell presented the records while Wolf settled behind his desk and opened a bottle of beer. When Bell finished, Wolf looked at the black dots. Mr. Mercer marked both calls but concealed the meaning of the second. He knew the telephone would ring at 9:10, Bell said. Nobody else in Hensley's office knew. Miriam Lane knew Hensley expected a private call, I said. She did not know the time. Kramer did not. The police officers did not. I did only because Hensley had told me to arrive at 9 and wait for further instructions. Even I did not know the telephone would ring at 9:10. Wolf poured beer. Yet, Mr. Mercer began moving before the bell, completed its first ring. He was watching the signal. Lampview, yes, Bell leaned forward. His reaction was not habit. It was anticipation. Wolf drank, put down the glass, and regarded the papers. Bring him. Daniel Mercer was released from the hospital that afternoon. At 5:30, Pearlie Stebbins escorted him into the office. A bandage covered the wound above his ear, and his face had the color of old paper. Howard Pike followed, carrying the same leather case and a fresh supply of objections. Kramer came last. Miriam Lane, Stephen Vale, Evelyn Hensley, and Eleanor West had been ordered to appear the following evening. Wolf had chosen not to include them in the first examination. He wanted Mercer without an audience. Mercer sat in the red leather chair. Pike took the yellow one. Kramer remained standing near the bookshelves. Wolf pushed the calendar. Across the desk. You expected the 9:10. Call. Mercer looked at the black marks. No, Bell. Placed the telephone records beside them. 7 calls at the Carlton Club, 3 at your apartment, and 2 at Pike's office. Every Thursday. Everyone at 9:10, Pike said. Those records do not establish the caller's identity or the subjects discussed. No, Wolf replied. They establish that your client lied. Mercer touched the edge of his bandage. I received business calls. Why did they follow the 6:40 calls to Hensley? I don't know that they did. You marked both times on your calendars. The circles were reminders of what? Mercer said nothing. Wolf's voice sharpened. The telephone rang in a room containing a murdered man, police officers, Mr. Bell, Mr. Goodwin, and you. No one else expected it. You crossed the room before the first ring ended because you knew the exact minute at which the signal would arrive. Mercer looked at Pike. Pike said, Do not answer. Wolf leaned back. Your attorney's caution is admirable but late. Your movement answered the question before your mouth had an opportunity to interfere. Kramer stepped forward. Who made those calls? Mercer's eyes remained on the calendar. I never knew. Then what did you discuss? Nothing. Bell opened another statement. The Carlton Club operator heard you say the account is closed on February 12th. On March 5th, a waiter heard, Tell her the figure stands. On April 2nd, you said there will be no delay tomorrow. Mercer's hand tightened. Wolf said, The calls were confirmations. After Hensley approved a transfer at 6:40, you reported at 9:10 that the records had been altered and the funds would move the next morning. No. Then offer another explanation. Mercer looked toward the door. Kramer said, You are not leaving. Pike rose. Inspector, sit down. Pike sat. Wolf took a sheet from Bell and read the dates aloud. After each 9:10 call, Calder Business Services received company funds the following morning. When no transfer occurred, Mercer's 9:10 call lasted longer, and a replacement authorization appeared within 48 hours. The caller was supervising you, Wolf said. Mercer swallowed. Not me. Whom? Arthur. Arthur Hensley did not receive the 9:10 calls. You did. He knew about them. Eventually, Wolf said. That is why he changed the destination on the final Thursday. He took control of the conspirators' routine and used it as a trap. Mercer stared at him. Wolf continued. Hensley told the caller that the 9:10 confirmation must come to his private office. He intended Mr. Bell to listen from the records room. He intended the call to identify the person directing the transfers. Pike said, That is speculation. It is reconstruction. Your client will correct it if he can. Mercer's voice was low. Arthur did not know who called. Knew enough to threaten exposure. He thought he did. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Then, you know what he thought. Mercer realized the mistake and closed his mouth. Bell said, when the telephone rang after Hensley's death, you were afraid the caller would speak before you could deliver the warning. Mercer shook his head. You seized the receiver, Bell continued, because the first words might have named Calder, the amount transferred or the person controlling the account. You had to speak first. No. You said, no, he cannot come to the telephone. That was not an answer. The caller had said nothing. It was a prepared signal. Mercer's resistance weakened visibly. Wolf said, what did the phrase mean? No response. Kramer moved closer. What did it mean? Mercer looked at Pike one final time. The lawyer's face remained controlled, but his eyes did not. Mercer turned back to Wolf. It meant the operation was exposed. The office became still. Bell asked, who taught you the phrase? The caller. Man or woman? I don't know. You spoke to the person every week. The voice was altered. Why did you cooperate? Mercer looked down at his hands. It began with one payment. I was desperate. A loan was due, and Arthur had refused to release company money. The caller said funds could be moved temporarily through Calder and returned after the sale. Who formed Calder? Kramer asked. I was told Pike would. Handle the papers. Pike stood. That statement is false. Mercer turned on him. You brought me the forms. I brought documents prepared for a client. Who? Pike's mouth closed. Wolf said, continue, Mr. Mercer. Mercer breathed heavily. The first payment cleared my loan. Then another paid the interest on the country house. By the time I understood the money was being taken from dormant accounts, my name was attached to everything, so you continued. Bell said, I had no choice. You always had a choice, not one that left me outside prison. Wolf poured another glass of beer. The caller used your debts to secure obedience. You supplied authorization codes, concealed altered forms, and answered the second weekly signal. Mercer nodded once. Did you kill Arthur Hensley? No. Did you know he intended to expose the fraud? Not until that afternoon. What happened? He came into my office carrying the Brown portfolio. He said he had found the original record and knew the first transfer occurred months before Calder was formed. He told me to choose between helping him and going to prison. The original record was the right book. I thought so. What book? Mercer closed his eyes. A bank control book. It contained handwritten adjustments made before transactions entered the official system. Arthur believed it would show who began the scheme. Where was it? He did not tell me. He said the person coming at 8:15 would bring it. Who was that person? I don't know. You expect us to believe that? I was ordered to leave the office before 7 and return at 9. When I came back, the police were already there, Bell said. Yet you knew the 9:10 call would still come, yes? Why not warn the police? Because I knew what the caller might say. And you feared the voice would reveal your part before you could control the conversation. Mercer's shoulders sagged. Yes. Wolf asked, what were you supposed to say if everything remained safe? The transfer stands. And if danger existed? He cannot come to the telephone. That completed the meaning of the exchange. Mercer had not invented his words after seeing Hensley's body. He had delivered the conspirators' emergency signal. Bell said, the caller disconnected because your message was complete. Yes. Did the caller later contact you? A note was left at my apartment. It told me to find Arthur's call book and destroy it. Did you find it? Mercer hesitated. Yes, Kramer's voice rose. Where is it? It was hidden in the Brown portfolio behind a loose panel in my office. Arthur had placed it there before confronting me. Why take it home? I wanted to know who had been calling. Did it contain the name? No, only times, amounts, and phrases Arthur had heard. What was the wrong book? Wolf asked. The call book. I believed it was the evidence Arthur meant. But the note in the portfolio said the real proof was in the bank control book. Who attacked you? I never saw the face. I was reading the last page when the apartment door opened. Someone struck me from behind. What was on the last page? Mercer looked at Eleanor West's name among the list Bell had prepared for the gathering. Arthur had written one sentence. What sentence? Mercer spoke slowly. The weekly voice made one mistake. She used a figure that existed only in the bank's private correction record. Kramer said, Eleanor West Mercer. Shook his head. Arthur had not written her name, but you thought of her. She controlled those. records, Wolf's expression did not change. So did someone else. Pike's hand stopped on the clasp of his leather case. It was a small movement, but Bell saw it. So did Wolf. Wolf said, "Mr. Pike, tomorrow evening you will bring every document connected to the creation of Calder Business Services. I will do no such thing. Then Mr. Kramer will obtain them." Pike stood. "My professional obligations will not protect evidence of murder." Pike left without waiting for Mercer. Kramer ordered Purley to take Mercer back into custody. Before reaching the door, Mercer turned. "I did not kill Arthur." Wolf regarded him. "I believe you." Kramer stared. "You do? Mr. Mercer is guilty of theft, conspiracy, obstruction, and an oppressive number of lies. But his conduct after the murder was the conduct of a frightened subordinate, not the person directing events. Who directed them?" Wolf looked at the telephone. The person who knew Mercer would answer before the bell rang. After they left, Bell gathered the calendars and statements. "Tomorrow's gathering?" "Yes," Wolf said. "You know who killed Hensley?" "I know why," Daniel answered. "That tells us what the murderer expected him to do." "And the murderer?" Wolf rang for Fritz. "The murderer made one error, Mr. Bell. Daniel feared the caller might speak first, but the caller never intended to speak at all." Bell frowned. Wolf settled back in his chair. The signal had already been arranged before Arthur Hensley was killed. Only the person who attended the 8:15 meeting knew that Hensley had redirected it to his office. The telephone on my desk rang. No one moved. On the third ring, I answered. There was silence, followed by the faint click of a line being closed. Wolf looked at the instrument with open contempt. "Tomorrow," he said. "We shall ask the caller to try again." Chapter 10. The last call on Riddle Street at 9 the following evening. Wolf's office contained every person who had lied about Arthur Hensley. Daniel Mercer sat in the red leather chair, with Purley Stebbins behind him. Evelyn Hensley and Miriam Lane occupied the couch. Stephen Vale stood near the bookshelves. Eleanor West, the bank officer, sat stiffly in yellow. Howard Pike held his leather case on his knees. Inspector Kramer stood by the globe. Arthur Bell had arranged the hidden ledger, telephone records, Mercer's marked calendars, Arthur's recovered call book, and the bank's private control book on a table. The last item had been found under warrant in Eleanor West's locked records drawer. Wolf rang for beer. Kramer said, "Are you going to solve it?" "Mr. Bell will begin." Bell faced Daniel. Arthur discovered that company funds had been diverted through Calder Business Services for nearly a year. The money passed through shell accounts and paid your debts. You supplied the authorization code M17 and replaced approved forms. Eleanor West altered the bank's correction records and moved the funds. Eleanor rose. "That is false," Wolf said. "Sit down." Bell placed the Thursday chart beside the ledger. Each Thursday at 6:40, Eleanor called Hensley's private line through a voice distorter. At 9:10, a second call reached Daniel. If the transfer remained safe, he confirmed it. If danger existed, he said, he cannot come to the telephone. Daniel's face tightened. Arthur uncovered the scheme, Bell continued. He built the hidden ledger and arranged a confrontation at 8:15 on the night he died. Kramer looked at Wolf. "With Mercer?" "Yes," Wolf said. The torn appointment contained Daniel Mercer's name. Daniel stood, but Purley returned him to the chair. "You said you believed he was not the murderer," Kramer said. "I wished Mr. Mercer to believe it. A frightened liar guards his words. A reassured liar improves them." Wolf leaned back. Mercer claimed Hensley ordered him to leave before 7 and return at 9. Elevator records prove he used the service entrance shortly before 8 and remained on the 4th floor until after the murder. It proves nothing. Daniel said. "It proves you attended the meeting you denied," Bell replied. Wolf continued. "Hensley confronted you with the ledger and demanded the identity of your accomplice. You placed a sedative in his water under the pretense that it would calm him. When it slowed him, you took his pistol and shot him." Evelyn closed her eyes. "You removed the recorder, tore your appointment from the book, took the Brown portfolio, and arranged the pistol to suggest suicide. You searched for the hidden ledger but failed to find it. Later, during the police search, you moved the filing cabinet, opened the recess and replaced the cabinet badly." Daniel gripped the chair arms. "You cannot prove that." Bell lifted Arthur's missing call book. This was recovered from Pike's case under a warrant. The final page records Arthur's plan and names you as the 8:15 visitor. Pike's face went white. I did not know what it contained. You knew enough to hide it, Kramer said. Eleanor turned toward Daniel. You said everything was destroyed. The room became silent. Bell said, the 910 call still came because Eleanor did not know the confrontation had ended in murder. She called from the public booth and expected Daniel's coded report. Daniel saw the signal lamp glow before the bell finished its first ring. He rushed to answer because he knew exactly what was coming. Wolf nodded. His speed exposed knowledge no innocent man possessed. Daniel said, Arthur was alive when I left. No, Wolf replied. You told us you panicked when the call came, but no one had yet told you Hensley was dead. You panicked because you already knew he could not answer. You also claimed the caller said nothing, yet you answered before a question was asked. The phrase was not conversation. It was the emergency signal used by you and Miss West. Wolf indicated the voice distorter. The earlier male-voiced threats were made by Mercer. He warned Hensley to stop examining the dormant accounts and deliberately brushed the device against Miriam Lane's green coat before discarding it near the public booth. The fibers were planted to turn suspicion toward Miss Lane. Miriam's face tightened. The later anonymous calls about the wrong book were made by Eleanor, Wolf continued. She knew the contents of Hensley's evidence because she had helped create the false records. Her supposed assistance was an attempt to recover the control book before the police found it. Kramer stepped closer. Did you kill Arthur Hensley? For several seconds, Daniel stared at the telephone. Then it rang. Nobody moved. It rang again. Daniel flinched toward it before stopping himself. Wolf said, There again. Habit. Daniel covered his face. I did not mean to kill him. He said he would telephone the police before Bell arrived. I took the pistol to frighten him. He reached for the receiver. And you fired, Kramer said. Yes. Eleanor whispered, Fool. Daniel looked at her. You promised the weekly call would protect us. It would have if you had not answered like a frightened child. Kramer ordered Pearlie to take them both. Pike was held for concealing evidence. Stephen Vale was cleared, though he admitted suspecting Mercer and remaining silent. Wolf told Kramer that Caleb Ross had been found alive. Daniel had sent him a false warning to keep him hidden and preserve suspicion against him. The old ledger proved Ross had been framed years earlier, and Hensley had intended to clear his name. When the others had gone, Bell remained before Wolf's desk. The telephone call solved it. No, Wolf said. Mr. Mercer solved it by answering. I asked who had placed the final call. Saul. From the kitchen. I opened the door and told Saul his timing was excellent. Wolf lifted his beer. Arthur Hensley had built a trap around a telephone and died before he could hear it close. Daniel Mercer survived the meeting, the police search, and a dozen lies. He did not survive one familiar ring. That was the last call on Riddle Street.
I hope you like our story. Kindly press the bell icon to subscribe our channel.